Get out, right now. I don't care where you go or what happens to you." Those were the last words my husband spoke to me before shoving me out of our Mercedes onto a deserted highway exit at 2 a.m. The door slammed shut, and I watched the taillights disappear into the darkness, along with my phone, my purse, and apparently my 23-year marriage. What David didn't know as he sped away with his mistress giggling in the passenger seat was that the helpless, dependent wife he'd just abandoned owned everything he thought was his. And I mean everything. My name is Catherine Morrison, and until that freezing November night, I had played my role perfectly. The devoted wife, the understanding partner, the woman who smiled politely when her husband came home, smelling like someone else's perfume. I had my reasons for the performance, and they were about to pay off in ways David's small, cheating brain could never comprehend. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Every good revenge story needs context, and mine begins 6 months earlier in the office of my attorney, Richard Chen, where I sat across from him holding divorce papers. I had no intention of filing. Not yet, anyway. "Mrs. Morrison, I have to advise you again that waiting is risky," Richard said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Every day you delay, he has more opportunity to hide assets, drain accounts, prepare his defense." I smiled the same patient smile I'd been perfecting for 2 decades. "Richard, I've waited this long. A few more months won't matter. I need everything documented. Every affair, every lie, every penny he thinks he's cleverly moving around. When I move, I want it to be checkmate, not check." Richard had been my father's attorney before he became mine, and he was one of 3 people who knew the truth about my financial situation. See, when my father, James Westbrook, died 5 years ago, he left his considerable fortune to me in a trust so ironclad that even I couldn't access the principal until certain conditions were met. But the interest alone was substantial, deposited monthly into an account David knew nothing about. My father had never liked David. "He's got the eyes of a con man and the work ethic of a trust fund baby," Dad had said at our rehearsal dinner after too much scotch and not enough filter. "You're making a mistake, Katie girl, but I suppose you need to learn some lessons the hard way." He'd kissed my forehead and added, "Just remember when it all goes south, and it will. You've got more ammunition than he could ever imagine. Use it wisely." I should have listened then, but I was 25 and stupid in love, and David had been charming in the way that dangerous men often are. Attentive romantic, always knowing exactly what to say. It took me 5 years to realize he was charming because he was performing just like I eventually learned to do. The affairs started small. Or maybe they'd always been there, and I just finally noticed. A receptionist named Amber who texted too frequently. A colleague named Jessica who required too many late-night strategy sessions. I convinced myself I was imagining things, that my insecurity was the problem, not David's wandering dick. Then came the credit card statement. I remember the moment exactly. March 15th, 2 years ago, standing in our kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that David loved to show off to friends despite never cooking a single meal. The statement showed a charge for $2,000 at a jewelry store. My birthday was coming up, so initially my heart did that stupid flutter of excitement. Maybe he remembered. Maybe he still cared. My birthday came and went. No jewelry. No mention of jewelry. No acknowledgement of my birthday beyond a grocery store card he clearly grabbed that morning. 2 weeks later, I saw the necklace. Around the neck of his dental hygienist, Tricia, at the hospital charity gala, David had insisted we attend. A delicate white gold chain with a pendant of intertwined hearts studded with tiny diamonds. She touched it constantly, the way women do when they're wearing something that means something. "Beautiful necklace," I said to her at the bar, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. She blushed, actually blushed. "Oh, thank you. It was a gift from someone special." "How special?" I asked, smiling like we were girlfriends sharing secrets. "Very." She giggled. "I probably shouldn't say, but he's a doctor, and he's very generous and very attentive, if you know what I mean." I knew exactly what she meant. David was an orthopedic surgeon, and he was indeed generous with other people's money, specifically with the money from our joint account that I'd been funneling in from my trust interest money he thought came from my little bookkeeping job at a local firm. That was my first mistake in the marriage, allowing him to believe I was financially dependent on him. My second mistake was not correcting that assumption immediately. But by the time I realized how thoroughly he'd constructed this narrative, where he was the brilliant provider and I was the lucky recipient of his success, I decided to let him keep believing it. Information asymmetry, my father used to call it. The person who knows more always has the power. So I smiled at Tricia, ordered another glass of wine, and started planning. Not divorce, not yet. Documentation, evidence. A case so airtight that when the hammer finally fell, there would be no appeals, no negotiations, no mercy. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb, former FBI current miracle worker. I don't want to know if he's cheating, I told him at our first meeting in a coffee shop 40 miles from our home. I know he's cheating. I want to know everything. How many, how long, how much he's spending, where he's taking them, what he's promising them. I want a documentary, not a snapshot. Marcus delivered. Over the next 18 months, he provided me with a highlight reel of David's extracurricular activities that would have made a soap opera writer blush. Tricia, the dental hygienist, lasted 4 months before David got bored. Then came Melissa, a pharmaceutical rep, who David wined and dined at restaurants we'd never been to together. After Melissa came Angela, a patient's daughter who was barely legal and definitely a liability. David clearly had a type young and impressed by his MD credentials and his carefully maintained physique. But the real bombshell came 6 months ago. Her name was Vanessa Laurent, and unlike the others, she wasn't some starry-eyed girl impressed by a doctor's white coat. Vanessa was 35, divorced, a real estate agent, with her own money and her own agenda. And according to Marcus's surveillance, she and David weren't just sleeping together. They were planning. "You need to see this," Marcus said, sliding an envelope across the table at our usual coffee shop. Inside were photos of David and Vanessa at a lawyer's office. Not just any lawyer, but Patrick Sorensen, who specialized in asset protection and divorce strategy. My blood ran cold. When were these taken? Last Tuesday, I followed up with my contact at Sorensen's firm. "Your husband retained him 3 weeks ago. They're building a case, Catherine. He's preparing to divorce you." I laughed. Actually laughed, startling the barista who was wiping down nearby tables. "Let me guess. He's going to claim I contributed nothing to the marriage, that his medical practice is solely his achievement, that he deserves everything." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's exactly the strategy. Sorensen's good at it too. I've seen him eviscerate dependent spouses in court. He'll paint you as a gold digger who trapped a promising medical student and rode his coattails to a comfortable lifestyle." "Fascinating," I said, meaning it. "What else?" "There's more. Vanessa's not just his mistress. She's his business partner. They've been looking at properties together. A clinic, upscale cosmetic orthopedics for wealthy clients willing to pay cash. They found a location in Scottsdale. He's planning to move his practice, move his life, and apparently he thinks he's going to fund it with marital assets." I sat back processing. David thought he was so clever, so strategic. He had no idea he was playing checkers while I'd been playing chess for 2 years. "Marcus, I need you to document everything about this Scottsdale plan. Every property they look at, every business plan they draft, every penny he tries to move. And I need it all admissible in court." "Already on it," Marcus said. "But Catherine, you need to move soon. If he files first, it changes the dynamics. He'll have the element of surprise." "No," I said firmly. "He won't. Because I'm not going to let him file. I'm going to make him think he's winning right up until the moment he loses everything." That's when I called Richard and told him to prepare the real papers. Not the ones I'd file, the ones David would never see coming. The papers that would reveal that the house he thought was jointly owned, solely mine, purchased with trust funds before we married and kept in my name, only though I'd let him handle the mortgage payments like a generous allowance. The investment accounts he thought we'd built together, funded entirely by my trust interest with careful documentation showing every deposit. The vacation home in Aspen he loved to brag about. Also mine, a gift from my father's estate that I'd graciously allowed David to enjoy. David's medical practice was his, I'd give him that. But the building it was in, I owned that too, through an LLC my father had set up. David's rent checks went to what he thought was a property management company. Really, they went to me. "This is going to be spectacular," Richard said, reviewing the documents. "But Catherine, are you sure you want to wait? Every day he's with this woman, every day he's planning to leave you." "Every day he's building my case," I finished. "I want him confident, Richard. I want him so sure he's won that he gets sloppy. Let him move money, let him make plans. Everything he does just makes my victory sweeter." So I waited. I played the oblivious wife beautifully. When David started coming home later and later, I asked if he'd eaten dinner. When he stopped touching me entirely, I pretended not to notice. When he took his phone into the bathroom for every shower, I smiled and asked about his day. "You're very patient," my best friend Sarah said one afternoon over coffee. She was one of the 3 people who knew the truth, along with Richard and Marcus. "I don't know how you sleep next to him every night knowing what he's doing." "Ambien helps," I joked. But truthfully, I slept fine. Better than fine, actually. There's something peaceful about knowing you're in control, even when everyone thinks you're powerless. The confrontation came sooner than I expected, though not in the way I'd planned. I was ready for David to ask for a divorce, ready for him to sit me down with fake sympathy and explain that he wasn't happy that we'd grown apart, that he was leaving. I had my reaction prepared. Tears and confusion and pleading, all designed to make him feel guilty enough to offer a settlement that would seem generous but would actually be insulting. Instead, he kicked me out of a moving vehicle. It was a Saturday night late. David had been in Scottsdale all week, supposedly at a medical conference. Really, he'd been with Vanessa finalizing the purchase of their clinic building. I knew this because Marcus had photos of them signing papers, toasting with champagne, kissing in the parking lot like teenagers. David came home around 10 p.m. smiling in that particular way men smile when they've made a decision that benefits them and they can't wait to execute it. I was in bed reading or pretending to read. Really, I was reviewing the final documents Richard had prepared. Everything was ready. I just needed the right moment. "Pack a bag," David said from the doorway. I looked up genuinely surprised. This wasn't in any script I'd imagined. "What? Pack a bag. We're going to the cabin." The cabin was a small property in the mountains, rustic and isolated, that David had inherited from his grandfather. We went maybe twice a year, usually when David wanted to pretend he was outdoorsy. Now, it's almost 11. "Yeah, now. I want to get there tonight, spend tomorrow disconnected, no phones, no distractions, just us." He smiled, and if I hadn't known better, I might have believed it was genuine. "We need to talk, Catherine. Really talk. I think we've been drifting, and I want to fix that." My heart sped up. This was it. He was going to ask for a divorce at the cabin, somewhere isolated, where my reaction wouldn't be public. Somewhere he could control the narrative and the exit. "Okay," I said softly, playing my part. "That sounds nice. Let me just pack some things." "Make it quick," he said. "I want to get on the road." I should have known something was wrong when he insisted I leave my phone. No phones, remember. That's the point. Disconnection. He was already putting his own phone in the safe, making a show of the commitment. I should have known something was wrong when he suggested I leave my purse, too. "You won't need your wallet at the cabin. I've got cash for anything we need on the way." I should have known, but I was so focused on my own plan, my own endgame, that I missed the signs of his. We were 40 minutes into the drive when his phone rang. The phone that was supposedly locked in the safe at home. It was connected to the car's Bluetooth, and Vanessa's name flashed on the dashboard screen before David could dismiss it. "I thought your phone was in the safe," I said quietly. "I must have grabbed the wrong one," he said, not even bothering to make the lie convincing. "The wrong one. You have 2 phones." "Catherine, don't start." Don't start what David asking questions, expecting honesty, expecting basic respect. He was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. Actually, laughed this cold, dismissive sound that I'd never heard from him before. "You want to talk about respect? You who've contributed nothing to this marriage except spending my money and taking up space." "Your money," I said, and I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. Yes, my money. Money I earned while you played at having a job. Money that paid for everything you own, everything you are. Is that what you think? It's not what I think, Catherine. It's what is. And honestly, I'm done pretending otherwise. I'm done pretending you're anything other than a dependent who got lucky when I was too young and stupid to see what you really were. We were on a dark stretch of highway now. No other cars, no lights, except the occasional distant farmhouse. He was driving faster than he should, his jaw clenched, and I realized with a strange clarity that this wasn't going to end at a cabin with a conversation. "Where are we really going?" I asked. "Nowhere. We're not going anywhere. You are, though." He started slowing down, pulling toward an exit that led to nothing but rural roads and darkness. "David, what are you doing?" "I'm done, Catherine. Done with you, done with this marriage, done with playing nice. Vanessa and I are leaving for Scottsdale tomorrow, and you're not going to be a problem. You can't just leave me. There are laws, divorce proceedings, asset division." He laughed again, that same cold sound. "Asset division? You mean the assets I earned and you spent?" "Trust me, my lawyers already handled it. You'll be lucky to get anything when I'm done proving what a leech you've been." The car came to a stop at the end of the exit ramp. Dark fields stretched in every direction, no buildings, no people, no help. "Get out," he said. "What? You heard me. Get out of the car, right now." "David, we're in the middle of nowhere. I don't have my phone, my wallet, anything. You can't just—" "I can, and I am. Get out." When I didn't move fast enough, he reached across me, opened my door, and shoved. Hard. I stumbled out onto the gravel shoulder, catching myself before I fell completely. The door slammed immediately, and through the window, I could see someone in the passenger seat. Vanessa. She'd been there the whole time, lying down in the back, listening to everything. She was laughing. David rolled down the window, just enough to speak. "Do whatever you want, Catherine. Go wherever you want. I don't care anymore. By the time you figure out how to get home, Vanessa and I will be in Scottsdale, and you'll be served with papers. My lawyer says with your complete financial dependence and lack of contribution to my practice, you'll be lucky to get alimony. The house, the cars, the accounts, all of it stays with me. You get nothing." "David," I said, and I let my voice shake, let tears come to my eyes. Not because I was scared, but because I needed him to see what he expected to see. Helpless, broken. Catherine abandoned and alone. "Please, don't do this." "Too late," he said. Vanessa was giggling now, actually giggling like this was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. "Good luck, sweetheart. You're going to need it." The window rolled up. The car pulled away. And I stood there on that dark highway exit, watching the taillights disappear with no phone, no money, and no way home. I waited exactly 5 minutes, counting slowly in my head, making sure they were truly gone. Then I smiled, because 3 miles up the road was a truck stop where Marcus Webb was waiting in his surveillance van, having followed us the entire way per my instructions that morning when I'd texted him that David was acting strange. Because in my bra was a small recording device that had captured every word of that conversation. Because in my boot was $500 cash, and in my jacket lining was a credit card in my own name tied to an account David knew nothing about. And because tomorrow morning, when David and Vanessa were congratulating themselves on their cleverness, they were going to receive a very special delivery. Divorce papers filed by me in a county I'd carefully selected for its favorable laws toward property owners. Papers that detailed every asset I owned, every penny I'd contributed, every lie David had told. Papers accompanied by Marcus's extensive documentation of David's affairs, his asset-hiding attempts, and his abandonment of his spouse in a dangerous situation. But more than that, they were going to receive an eviction notice, because the building that housed David's medical practice, the one I owned through my LLC, his lease was up for renewal next month, and I was declining to renew it. His business, his pride and joy, was going to need a new home, and every commercial property owner in a 50-mile radius was going to receive a quiet heads-up from my attorney about Dr. David Morrison's current legal situation and questionable business ethics. I started walking toward the truck stop, my heels clicking on the pavement, and I started laughing. Really laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from deep relief and deeper satisfaction. "Catherine," Marcus's voice came through the darkness as his van pulled up beside me. "Are you okay? I got everything on the dashcam video and audio of him pushing you out. That's criminal abandonment, possibly endangerment. We can press charges." "Oh, we will," I said, climbing into the van. "We absolutely will. But first, I want to make a call." I used Marcus's phone to dial Vanessa's number. She answered on the second ring, breathless and excited. "Hello? Vanessa, this is Catherine Morrison," I said, my voice pleasant and professional. "I wanted to introduce myself properly since we're going to be seeing quite a bit of each other in court. I also wanted to give you a heads up that the property you and David purchased for your clinic in Scottsdale, the one you closed on yesterday, I'm the primary lien holder on that note. The previous owner owed me money and used that property as collateral. It's all very legal and very documented. So technically you don't own that building. I do. Just thought you should know before you make any more plans." There was silence on the other end. Then quietly, "What?" "You heard me. Also, David's practice building, I own that too. And the house you think you're moving into, mine as well." "Did David not mention that he's been living in properties I own for our entire marriage? That his successful lifestyle has been funded by my family's money?" "No, that seems like an important detail to leave out when planning a future together." More silence. Then Vanessa's voice, sharp and suspicious. "You're lying." "I'm really not. In fact, you'll have documentation of all of this by Monday morning when you're both served. But Vanessa, here's the thing I want you to understand. David didn't just abandon his wife tonight. He abandoned a woman who owns everything he thinks is his. And I'm not just going to divorce him. I'm going to dismantle every piece of the life he built on my foundation. His practice, his reputation, his assets, all of it. And you know what the beautiful part is?" "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper now. "You're going to be right there beside him when it all comes crashing down, because that clinic you two planned can't happen without a building. That life in Scottsdale can't happen without money. And David's about to learn that he has a lot less of both than he thought. Sweet dreams, Vanessa. You're going to need them." I hung up before she could respond. Marcus was staring at me with something like awe. "Damn, Catherine. Remind me never to cross you." "Just drive, Marcus. Take me to the Hilton downtown. I'm going to take a long hot shower, order the most expensive bottle of wine on the room service menu, and start planning my husband's complete and total destruction. And tomorrow, when he wakes up thinking he's won, I'm going to show him what losing really looks like." As we drove through the darkness toward the city lights, I thought about my father's words at my rehearsal dinner all those years ago. "You've got more ammunition than he could ever imagine. Use it wisely." "Don't worry, Dad," I whispered to the night. "I'm about to use it all." The war was just beginning, and David had no idea he'd already lost. The Hilton suite smelled like expensive vanilla and new beginnings. I stood under the shower for 40 minutes, washing away the dust from that highway and the last remnants of the woman I'd been pretending to be. When I finally emerged, wrapped in the hotel's plush robe, Marcus had already delivered my emergency bag, the one I'd kept at his office for exactly this kind of situation. Inside were clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and most importantly, my real phone, the one David had never seen. 17 missed calls, 12 from David, 5 from unknown numbers that were probably Vanessa using different phones. I smiled and ordered that wine, a $200 bottle of Chateau Margaux that I charged to the credit card in my maiden name. Let David's last night of freedom be expensive for me. I could afford it. The voicemails were predictable. The first 3 from David were angry, demanding to know how I'd gotten home, threatening me with legal consequences if I tried to press charges. By the 4th message, his tone had shifted. Vanessa must have told him about my call. "Catherine, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding about some property issues. Call me back. This is important." The 5th through 12th messages showed his progression from confidence to concern to barely concealed panic. My favorite was number 11. "Catherine, I don't know what lies you've been told, but you need to understand something. I've been supporting you for 23 years. Everything we have is because of my work, my career, my money. You can't just make up ownership claims and expect them to stick. My attorney will destroy you in court. Call me back so we can settle this like adults before you embarrass yourself." I took a sip of wine, savoring both the taste and David's desperation, and called Richard. "It's done," I said when he answered. "He abandoned me on Highway 72 around midnight. Marcus has video and audio. I recorded the entire conversation, including his admission that he's been planning this with his attorney and his mistress, and I planted the seed with Vanessa about the property issues." "Catherine, it's 1 a.m, Richard said, but I could hear the smile in his voice. "Did you really call his mistress?" "I did. And judging by David's increasingly frantic voicemails, she immediately told him everything I said. He's scared, Richard." "Good. I'll file first thing Monday morning, 8 a.m. soon as the courthouse opens. But Catherine, are you absolutely sure about the criminal charges? Abandonment is serious, and it will make the divorce extremely contentious." "I'm sure. I want him to understand that actions have consequences, real consequences, not just financial ones. He left me on a dark highway with no way to get help. What if Marcus hadn't been following us? What if something had happened to me? He needs to face that." "Agreed. I'll coordinate with the DA's office. With your recording and Marcus's surveillance footage, they'll likely be very interested, especially when they hear that his mistress was in the car, which makes this potentially conspiracy." Richard paused. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow everything changes." But I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened my laptop and started reviewing the empire David didn't know I'd built. My father had taught me young that money was power, but only if you knew how to use it properly. When he died, the trust he left me came with extensive real estate holdings, carefully structured LLCs, and a portfolio that had tripled in value over 5 years. The monthly interest alone was more than David made in a year at his practice, but I'd never told him. Never showed him. I'd let him think my bookkeeping job paid $40,000 a year, while I was actually managing assets worth $40 million. The house David thought was ours, I'd purchased it outright 2 months before our wedding with money from my father. David's name had never been on the deed, but I'd let him make the mortgage payments to a fake loan servicer, really just an account I controlled. For 23 years, he'd paid me rent while thinking he was building equity in our marital home. His precious medical practice building, another property from my father's portfolio. David's clinic was one of 12 commercial tenants in a building I owned through Westbrook Properties LLC. His lease was up in 30 days, and I'd already instructed my property manager to send a non-renewal notice Monday morning. The vacation home in Aspen, a gift from my father's estate, deeded solely to me. David had renovated it 3 years ago, spending $80,000 that he thought made it partly his. Really, he'd just improved my property value while I carefully documented every receipt. But the real masterpiece was the Scottsdale building. Vanessa and David thought they'd been so clever finding that prime location, negotiating the purchase price down, closing the deal while David was supposedly at a conference. What they didn't know was that the previous owner, Robert Chen, was Richard's cousin. When Robert mentioned he was selling and described the eager buyers, a doctor, and his real estate agent girlfriend, Richard had called me immediately. "This is your chance," he'd said. "Let them buy it, but buy the debt. Robert's willing to carry a note for the right price, and you become the lien holder. They think they own the building, but you control everything." It had cost me $2 million to buy Robert's note, but it was worth every penny. David and Vanessa had their names on a deed for a building they didn't actually control. One missed payment, one violation of the lien terms, and I could foreclose. I owned their dream before they'd even moved in. I was reviewing the lien documents when my phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. "Please tell me you're okay," she said, before I could even say hello. "Marcus called me. He told me what David did. Catherine, I'm so sorry. I'm coming to get you." "I'm fine. I'm at the Hilton. And Sarah, I'm better than fine. I'm free." "Free? He threw you out of a car." "He did, and Marcus filmed it. I recorded the audio, and by Monday morning, David's going to realize he just committed about 4 different crimes while simultaneously destroying his divorce case. This is the best thing that could have happened." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You're actually happy." "Ecstatic. For 2 years I've been waiting for the right moment to move. David just gave it to me with a bow on top. criminal abandonment, proof of adultery with conspiracy evidence of asset concealment, and a recording of him admitting he planned to defraud me in divorce court. Sarah, he gift-wrapped his own destruction. God, you're terrifying when you're like this. I love it. What do you need from me? Monday morning, 9 a.m. Can you meet me at Richard's office? I want witnesses when we tell David's attorney that we're filing. Specifically, I want you there because you're a therapist, and I want documented professional observation of my mental state. David's going to try to claim I'm unstable or vindictive. I want your expert testimony that I'm completely rational and acting in justified self-defense. I'll be there. Catherine, I'm proud of you. I know that sounds weird given the circumstances, but I am. You've been so patient, so strategic. Now make him pay. After we hung up, I finally tried to sleep, but my mind was racing with everything that needed to happen. The calls I needed to make, the people I needed to inform, the chess pieces I needed to move into position. At some point around 4 a.m. I drifted off, and when I woke at 7, the sun was streaming through the hotel windows, and I felt more rested than I had in years. I dressed carefully. Not the soft, feminine clothes. David preferred the ones that made me look dependent and decorative. Instead, I chose a black pantsuit I'd bought months ago in preparation for this day, paired with my grandmother's pearl earrings and my father's Rolex, the one he'd left me with a note that said, "Wear this when you need to remember who you really are." Marcus picked me up at 8:30. "You look like you're going to war," he said approvingly. "I am, and I'm going to win. Did you send the surveillance footage to Richard?" "First thing this morning. He's already shared it with his contact at the DA's office. Catherine, they're talking about multiple felony charges. Abandonment, reckless endangerment, conspiracy to commit fraud. David could be looking at jail time." "Good. What about Vanessa?" "She's panicking. My contact at her real estate office says she called in sick this morning, and when her broker tried to reach her about a closing, she was incoherent. Apparently, she spent all night researching property liens and calling attorneys. She knows she's in trouble. She should be. She participated in abandoning me. She's been complicit in David's asset hiding, and she bought property using what she had to know was suspicious funding. I hope she has a good lawyer." We arrived at Richard's office at 8:45. Sarah was already there, professional, in a navy dress, her therapist face firmly in place. Richard's conference room had been transformed into a war room with documents covering every surface, multiple laptops open, and a presentation screen showing a timeline of David's affairs and financial movements. "This is impressive," I said, taking it all in. "This is 2 years of work," Richard replied, "and it's bulletproof. Catherine, I've been practicing law for 30 years and I've never seen a case this well documented. When we walk into court, the judge is going to take one look at this evidence and David's attorney is going to want to negotiate immediately. No negotiations. I want everything. Everything is what you'll get. The house is yours, always has been. The Aspen property is yours. The Scottsdale building is functionally yours through the lien. David's practice will be homeless in 30 days when his lease expires. His bank accounts are about to be frozen pending investigation of asset concealment. Catherine, when this is done, David will be lucky to have his medical license and his car. That's it. What about Vanessa?" "Vanessa's in a different kind of trouble. She's a licensed real estate agent who participated in a property purchase using potentially fraudulent financial statements. Her broker's license could be suspended pending investigation. She could face civil suits from the property seller for misrepresentation. And if she knew about David's marriage and participated in his plans to defraud you, she could be named as a co-defendant in civil court." Sarah whistled low. "You're not just divorcing him. You're dismantling his entire life." "He tried to dismantle mine first," I said simply. "He just didn't realize my life was built on bedrock while his was built on sand." At 9:03, Richard's secretary buzzed in. "Mr. Chen Patrick Sorensen is on line 1. He says it's urgent regarding the Morrison case." Richard smiled and put the call on speaker. "Patrick, good morning. What can I do for you?" Patrick Sorensen's voice came through tight with barely controlled anger. "Richard, what the hell is going on? I just got served with divorce papers on behalf of Catherine Morrison, and the property claims are insane. She's claiming sole ownership of the marital home, the Aspen property, and she's threatening eviction from my client's medical practice. This is clearly a preemptive strike to muddy the waters before my client files. We both know these claims won't hold up. Patrick, everything in those documents is factual and provable. Catherine has sole ownership of all listed properties purchased either before the marriage or through inheritance. David's name appears on none of the deeds. I have documentation going back 25 years. That's impossible. David's been paying the mortgage on that house for over 2 decades. David's been paying rent to an account Catherine controls. There is no mortgage. The house was purchased outright in Catherine's name 2 months before the wedding. David never contributed to the purchase and has no ownership claim. Silence on the other end. Then carefully. Richard, are you telling me that for their entire marriage, my client has been living in properties solely owned by his wife? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And Patrick, that's the least of David's problems right now. Have you spoken to your client this morning? Not since last night. Why? Because at 7:30 this morning, Catherine filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney for abandonment and reckless endangerment. She has video evidence of David forcibly removing her from a vehicle on a dark highway at midnight with no phone, no money, and no means of getting help. She also has audio recording of David admitting he planned to defraud her in divorce proceedings and evidence that his mistress Vanessa Laurent was present in the vehicle during the abandonment. The silence stretched longer this time. When Patrick spoke again, his voice had lost all its aggressive confidence. He threw his wife out of a moving car on Highway 72 at approximately 11:45 p.m. last night. Multiple witnesses, clear video recorded confession. Patrick, your client didn't just blow his divorce case. He committed multiple felonies. Jesus Christ. Richard, I need to speak with my client immediately. Can we continue this conversation later? Of course, but Patrick, understand this. Catherine's not interested in negotiations. After being physically abandoned and verbally abused, she wants everything she's legally entitled to, plus damages for emotional distress, plus restitution for 23 years of David using her assets while claiming credit for their lifestyle. I'd advise your client to get a criminal attorney before he worries about the divorce. Richard hung up and looked at me. That went well. He didn't know about last night, I said. David didn't tell him. Of course he didn't. David probably thought he could spin it or hide it or somehow make it not matter. He doesn't understand that the criminal case and the divorce case are now interconnected. Every argument he makes about you being dependent and contributing nothing is contradicted by the fact that you own everything. Every claim that he deserves the assets is destroyed by evidence that the assets were never his. Sarah leaned forward. What happens now? Now we wait for David to realize how thoroughly he's screwed himself. It shouldn't take long. It took 17 minutes. At 9:20, David himself called Richard's office, bypassing his attorney entirely. Richard didn't put it on speaker this time, but he didn't need to. We could hear David's voice from across the conference table, loud and angry and scared. Richard listened for a moment, then calmly said, David, I'm Catherine's attorney. Anything you say to me could be used in court. You should really speak with Patrick before we have this conversation. More shouting from the phone. No, David, Catherine's not interested in talking to you right now. Not after you abandoned her on a highway. Yes, we have video. Yes, we have audio. Yes, it's been shared with law enforcement. Richard paused, listening. David, I'm going to give you some free advice as someone who's been practicing family law for 3 decades. Stop talking. Stop calling. Stop trying to fix this. Get yourself a criminal attorney, immediately tell them everything, and prepare for the possibility that you're going to be arrested. What you did last night was illegal, and no amount of justification or explanation is going to change that. Richard hung up while David was still talking. He wanted to know if you'd drop the criminal charges if he gave you a favorable divorce settlement, Richard said. I told him that's not how criminal law works. You can't plea bargain your way out of a felony by offering your wife money that was already hers. He's desperate, Marcus observed. Good. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Catherine, this is Vanessa. We need to talk. What you said about the Scottsdale property, is it true? Please, I have my entire savings in that building. Call me. I showed the text to Richard. Should I respond? No. She's going to be deposed eventually. Anything you say to her now could be misconstrued. Let her panic. But Vanessa wasn't done. Over the next hour, she sent 14 more texts, each more desperate than the last. She claimed she didn't know David was still married. She said he told her they were separated and the divorce was almost final. She insisted she'd never have participated in abandoning me if she'd known the truth. She begged me to release the lien on the Scottsdale property because it would bankrupt her. "She's lying," Marcus said, scrolling through the texts on my phone. "I have surveillance of her and David at a restaurant 3 months ago where they explicitly discussed divorce strategy. She knew he was married and helped him plan to leave you with nothing." "Save all those texts," Richard instructed. "They're admissions that she knew about the marriage and participated in financial planning, which contradicts any claim that she was an innocent third party." At 10:30, Richard's secretary buzzed again. "Mr. Chen, there's a Detective Morrison here to see you. He says it's about the Catherine Morrison case." We looked at each other. "That was fast," Richard said. "Send him in." Detective James Morrison. No relation to David, despite the shared name, was a tall black man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He shook hands with everyone, then sat down and opened a folder. "Mrs. Morrison, I've reviewed the complaint you filed this morning along with the video and audio evidence. I also spoke with the assistant DA, and we all agree this is a serious case. I need to take your official statement, and then I'll need to speak with your witness, Mr. Webb. After that, I'll be bringing Dr. Morrison in for questioning." For the next 2 hours, I walked Detective Morrison through everything. The deterioration of my marriage, David's affairs, the discovery of his divorce plans, and finally last night's abandonment. I showed him the recording device I'd been wearing, explained Marcus's surveillance operation, and provided context for why I'd been prepared with backup plans. "Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask, if you knew your husband was planning to leave you, why didn't you file for divorce first? Why wait until he escalated to physical abandonment?" "Because I wanted to give him every opportunity to do the right thing, Detective. I kept hoping he'd come clean, ask for a fair divorce, acknowledge my contributions to our life together. Instead, he committed multiple crimes while trying to defraud me. I didn't make him do that. He chose it." Detective Morrison nodded slowly. "And the property claims, the ones about you owning everything. Your attorney says that's all documented." "Completely. I can prove ownership of every asset going back to before our marriage. David never owned any of it. He just thought he did because I let him handle the bills and make payments to accounts I controlled. That's going to be important for the fraud case. If you can prove the assets were always yours, then his plans to claim them in divorce constitute attempted fraud, which supports a conspiracy charge." He closed his folder. "Mrs. Morrison, based on what I've seen, I believe we have probable cause to arrest Dr. Morrison on charges of abandonment, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Ms. Laurent may also face charges as an accessory. How do you feel about that?" "I feel like justice is appropriate. Detective, I don't want revenge. I want accountability." He smiled slightly. "Ma'am, from where I'm sitting, those two things might look pretty similar, but I understand. We'll proceed with the investigation and likely make arrests within 48 hours. You'll need to be available for additional questions and possibly a grand jury if this goes that far." After Detective Morrison left with Marcus to get his statement, I finally let myself feel it. The fear from last night, the adrenaline of this morning, the satisfaction of watching everything fall into place. I'd been holding it together through pure will, and now sitting in Richard's conference room with Sarah's hand on my shoulder, I started shaking. "It's okay," Sarah said softly. "You're safe now. You did it." "Did I?" He could still fight this. He could claim I'm lying or exaggerating or trying to frame him. With video evidence and audio recordings, Catherine, he can claim whatever he wants. The evidence speaks for itself. Richard handed me a glass of water. "Drink. Breathe. The hard part's over. Now we just execute the plan." But the hard part wasn't over. At 2:30 that afternoon, while I was back at the hotel trying to rest, David showed up at the Hilton lobby. Hotel security called my room to warn me, and I made a decision that was probably stupid, but felt necessary. I went down to meet him. He looked terrible. Unshaven, still wearing yesterday's clothes, eyes wild with panic and rage. We sat in a quiet corner of the lobby bar, far enough from other people that we could talk, but public enough that he couldn't try anything stupid. "Catherine, please, we can fix this." "Fix what, David?" "The 23 years of lies, the multiple affairs, the part where you threw me out of a car and told me to do whatever I wanted because you didn't care what happened to me." I was angry. "I made a mistake, but criminal charges, really, you're going to have me arrested." "You committed crimes, David, multiple crimes. What did you think would happen?" "I thought you'd be reasonable. I thought we could settle this like adults, divide things fairly, move on with our lives. Instead, you're trying to destroy me." I leaned forward, keeping my voice level. "Let me be very clear about something. I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm simply taking back what was always mine and holding you accountable for your choices. The house mine. Always has been. The Aspen property mine from my father's estate. The building your practice is in mine, purchased by my father 30 years ago. David, you've been living in my assets while telling everyone, including yourself, that you were the provider. That was the lie. I'm just correcting the record. That's not how marriage works. Assets acquired during marriage are marital property regardless of whose name is on the deed, not when they were acquired before the marriage or through inheritance with clear documentation of separate property. Richard's already confirmed it with 3 different family law specialists. You have no claim to any of it." His face was turning red, that angry flush I'd seen so many times before. "Fine, take the properties. But my practice, my patients, my career, that's mine. You can't touch that." "I'm not touching your practice, David. I'm simply declining to renew your lease on the building. You're welcome to move your practice anywhere you'd like, just not in a building I own." "That will take months. I'll lose patient staff revenue. Catherine, that's my livelihood. And last night you left me on a dark highway with no way to contact anyone for help. That could have been my life, David. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about the inconvenience of your business relocation." He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. "Who are you?" "The Catherine I married would never do this. The Catherine you married was 25 years old and stupid enough to believe that love conquered all. This Catherine is 48, owns $40 million in assets, and is done being convenient for you. This is who I've always been under the act, David. You just never bothered to look." "40 million?" His voice cracked. "You have $40 million, give or take. My father's trust. The one you never asked about because you assumed my bookkeeping job was my only income. For 23 years, I've been managing more money than you'll make in your lifetime while you thought I was dependent on you. That's not my deception, David. That's your arrogance." He slumped back in his chair, looking physically sick. "The Scottsdale building. Vanessa said you own the debt." "I'm the lien holder, yes, which means I have certain rights regarding the property, including the right to foreclose if loan terms are violated or payments are missed. We can make the payments. We'll pay whatever terms were agreed." "I'm sure you'll try, but David, that building was purchased using financial statements that listed your income and assets. Assets that, as we've now established, you don't actually have. So those financial statements were fraudulent, which means the entire purchase could be invalidated." His face went gray. "Vanessa did those statements. She's the real estate agent. I just signed them." "You just threw your girlfriend under the bus in less than 5 seconds. That's impressive even for you." I stood up. "We're done here, David. Don't contact me again except through attorneys. Don't come to the hotel. Don't call. Don't text. Don't show up at places you think I might be. If you do, I'll add stalking and harassment to the charges. Are we clear?" "Catherine, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What I did last night was wrong, I know that. But please don't destroy everything. Don't take my career, my future, everything I've worked for. You did that yourself when you decided your wife was disposable. Goodbye, David." I walked away through the lobby and back to my room, and I didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear him starting to cry, big gasping sobs that probably looked pathetic to everyone in that bar. I didn't care. I was done caring about David's feelings. That evening, Sarah came over with takeout and wine. We sat on the hotel room floor eating pad thai and drinking Pinot Grigio while I told her about the confrontation. He actually tried to blame Vanessa for the financial statements, Sarah said, laughing. Oh my God, they're going to turn on each other so fast. They already are. I give it 3 days before one of them tries to make a deal by testifying against the other. Smart money's on Vanessa flipping first. She's got more to lose professionally, and she's known him for 8 months. That's not enough time to build real loyalty. We were right. At 10 p.m. that night, Vanessa called me from a blocked number. I debated answering, then decided why not. I put it on speaker so Sarah could hear. Catherine, please, I'm begging you. I didn't know the truth about the properties. David told me you two were separated, that the assets were all marital property, that splitting them was just a formality. Vanessa, I have surveillance footage of you and David at Moretti's restaurant discussing divorce strategy 3 months ago. You knew he was married. Silence. Then quietly, I knew he was married. But he said you were separated, living separate lives, that it was over except for paperwork. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. I'm 35, Catherine. My marriage ended badly. I'm desperate to have kids before it's too late, and David seemed perfect. Successful, established, ready to start over. I ignored the red flags because I wanted it to be true. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but I squashed it. Vanessa, you participated in abandoning me on a highway. You were in that car. You heard everything David said to me. You laughed. I know, God, I know, and I'm so ashamed. I was caught up in the moment in David's anger, and I thought you were this terrible person he'd described. I didn't know you owned everything. I didn't know he'd been lying about his financial situation. Catherine, I put my entire savings into that Scottsdale building. If you foreclose, I lose everything. That's unfortunate, but Vanessa, actions have consequences. You chose to be with a married man. You chose to participate in his schemes. You chose to laugh while his wife was abandoned on a dark road. Now you're facing the results of those choices. What if I testified against him? What if I told the police everything I know about his plans, his affairs, the way he hid money? Would that change anything? There it was. Sarah looked at me with raised eyebrows, and I carefully kept my voice neutral. Vanessa, I'm not the police or the prosecutor. Whether you cooperate with their investigation is between you and them. It won't affect my civil case against David or my decision about the Scottsdale property. That's a business decision based on documented fraud in the purchase process. Please, I'll do anything. I'll testify. I'll give back anything David ever gave me. I'll sign whatever you want. Just please don't take my building. It's not your building, Vanessa. It never was. The lien makes it functionally mine, and the fraudulent financials make the purchase invalid. I'm sorry you invested in something that was built on lies, but that's not my responsibility. Talk to your attorney about your options. I hung up while she was still pleading. Sarah whistled low. She's going to flip on him. Probably tomorrow. Probably. And you know what good. Let them destroy each other. Let everyone see what their great love really was, a transaction built on lies and money that neither of them actually had. My phone rang again immediately. This time it was Richard. Catherine, you're not going to believe this. Patrick Sorensen just withdrew as David's attorney. Conflict of interest, he says. Apparently David lied to him about the property situation and the circumstances of last night. Patrick's furious. So David needs a new lawyer. He needs several new lawyers, a criminal attorney, a divorce attorney, and probably a real estate attorney for the Scottsdale mess. And Catherine, finding good attorneys willing to take a case this damaged is going to be difficult and expensive, especially once word spreads about the evidence against him. How long until word spreads? It already has. I got 3 calls this afternoon from attorney friends asking if the rumors about Dr. Morrison were true. The legal community talks, and this case has everything: drama, crime, betrayal, and ironclad evidence. By Monday, every family law attorney in the state will know about this. After I hung up with Richard, I finally let myself feel it. The satisfaction, the relief, the pure vindication of watching everything I'd planned come together better than I'd imagined. David had destroyed himself, and all I'd done was document it and step out of the way. But there was one more thing I needed to do, one more person who needed to know the truth. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. Hello. The voice was groggy with sleep. 2 a.m. in London. James, it's Catherine. I'm sorry to call so late. My brother-in-law woke up fast. Catherine, is everything okay? Is David all right? David's fine, but our marriage isn't, and I need you to hear this from me before you hear it from him. I took a deep breath. I'm divorcing David. He's being investigated for criminal charges related to abandonment and fraud. And I need you to know that everything he's told you about our life, about his success and his career and his finances, has been a lie. James was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, what kind of lie? The house you visited, the one David always said he built his career to afford, I bought it before we married with money from Dad. The vacation home David loves to brag about, inheritance from my father. The medical practice building he said he invested in, I own it. James, every asset David has claimed credit for building has been mine all along. He's been living on my money while telling everyone, including your family, that he was supporting me. Jesus Christ, Catherine, does he know about your money? He does now. He didn't for 23 years. I let him think I was dependent on him because it seemed easier than fighting about it. But then he started planning to divorce me and take everything in the settlement. That's when I decided to stop pretending. What do you need from me? Nothing. I just wanted you to hear the truth before David tries to spin this as me being vindictive or crazy. Your brother committed crimes, James. He threw me out of a car on a dark highway with no money, no phone, no way to get help. He's being investigated by the police. This isn't a bitter divorce. This is accountability. James sighed deeply. I believe you. Catherine, I've always liked you, and I've always thought David didn't appreciate what he had. If there's anything I can do, let me know. And Catherine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry my brother turned out to be someone who would do this. After we hung up, I felt lighter somehow. The truth was out spreading through concentric circles from my life to David's, and there was something cleansing about it. For 23 years, I'd carried the weight of David's lies, the performance of being someone I wasn't. Now everyone would know who we really were. David would be exposed as a fraud and a criminal. I would be revealed as the woman who owned everything he'd claimed to build. And tomorrow, when the sun came up on my first real day of freedom, I was going to start building something new, something real, something that was entirely, completely, triumphantly mine. I woke Monday morning to 17 text messages and 9 missed calls. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. One was from David's mother, Eleanor, a woman who'd made the past 23 years of holidays absolutely miserable with her passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my clothes, my failure to give her grandchildren. Catherine, I don't know what lies you've been spreading, but David called me in tears saying you're trying to ruin him. This is not how a wife behaves. Call me immediately so we can discuss this like civilized people. I deleted it without responding. Eleanor had spent 2 decades treating me like I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She could find out the truth the same way everyone else would, through court documents and police reports. The call I did return was from Marcus, who sounded breathless with excitement. Catherine, you need to turn on Channel 7, right now. I fumbled for the TV remote, flipping to the local news station. And there it was. My life splashed across the morning broadcast with the headline, Prominent Surgeon Under Investigation for Domestic Violence. The anchor, a blonde woman with too much makeup and practiced concern, was reading from a teleprompter. David Morrison, a well-known orthopedic surgeon at Presbyterian Hospital, is under investigation following allegations that he abandoned his wife on a remote highway late Saturday night. According to sources close to the investigation, the incident was captured on video and may result in criminal charges. Dr. Morrison's attorney declined to comment, and the hospital has placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Administrative leave. I hadn't even thought about his hospital privileges. Of course they'd suspend him. No hospital wanted the liability of a doctor under criminal investigation treating patients. Marcus, how did the media get this so fast? Someone at the DA's office leaked it. My guess is they wanted public pressure to ensure this case gets taken seriously. Domestic violence cases get dropped all the time, but not when there's media scrutiny. Catherine, this is good for us. It doesn't feel good. It feels like my entire life is being dissected on television. It is. But you're going to come out of this as the victim who fought back, not the dependent wife who took it. Trust me, public opinion is going to be on your side." He was right, but that didn't make it easier. By the time I arrived at Richard's office for our 9 a.m. strategy meeting, there were 3 news vans parked outside and reporters shouting questions as I walked from my car to the building entrance. "Mrs. Morrison, is it true your husband tried to kill you? Catherine, what do you want people to know about domestic violence? Mrs. Morrison, are you seeking full custody of marital assets?" I kept my head down, didn't answer, and let building security escort me inside. Richard was waiting in his office with Sarah and a woman I didn't recognize, tall and black with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Catherine, this is Diane Foster. She's a public relations specialist who handles high-profile divorce cases. I took the liberty of calling her because this situation is about to get much bigger." Diane stood and shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Morrison, I've reviewed the basics of your case, and I have to say it's a PR dream and a nightmare at the same time. Dream because you have clear evidence and moral high ground. Nightmare because the media is going to dig into every aspect of your life looking for dirt. We need to control the narrative before it controls you. I don't want to be on TV talking about my failed marriage. You won't be. Not yet, anyway. What we're going to do is release a carefully worded statement through Richard's office, something that establishes the facts without editorializing, short, dignified, and impossible to twist. Then we're going to prepare for the inevitable deep dive into your finances, because when it comes out that you're worth $40 million, every news outlet in the country is going to want that story." "Why would my finances come out?" "Because David's going to leak them," Richard said grimly. "When he realizes he's losing the sympathy angle, he's going to pivot to making you look like the villain. Rich wife ruins hard-working husband's career over a marital spat. He'll paint you as vindictive and privileged." "Let him try," I said. "Everything I own came from my father or my own investment management. I didn't take a penny from David because he never had anything to take." "That's exactly the message we need to reinforce," Diane said. "But we have to be smart about it. No angry statements, no score settling in the press. You stay dignified, quiet, and let the evidence speak for itself. When this goes to court, the judge is going to see a meticulous, intelligent woman who protected her assets and defended herself against fraud. That's the Catherine Morrison the public needs to see, too." We spent the next hour crafting a statement that said everything and nothing at all. Catherine Morrison confirms that she has filed for divorce from Dr. David Morrison following an incident on November 14th in which she was abandoned without resources on a remote highway. Mrs. Morrison is cooperating fully with law enforcement and asks for privacy during this difficult time. She will have no further comment until legal proceedings are complete. "It's perfect," Diane said. "Short, factual, sympathetic without being maudlin. Release it at 2 p.m. after the lunch news cycle, but before evening broadcasts. It'll dominate the 5 o'clock news." At 10:30, Detective Morrison called. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're bringing Dr. Morrison in for questioning this afternoon at 3 p.m. We have enough evidence to arrest him, but the DA wants to give him a chance to make a statement first. Sometimes these guys talk themselves into deeper trouble." "Will I need to be there?" "Not unless you want to be. But Mrs. Morrison, I should warn you, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. Your husband hired Gerald Vance as his criminal attorney." I sucked in a breath. Gerald Vance was famous, the kind of lawyer who defended celebrities and millionaires and got them acquitted against impossible odds. He was also phenomenally expensive. How is David paying for Gerald Vance? His accounts should be frozen. "That's a very good question. We're looking into it. My guess is family money or his girlfriend's resources, but we'll find out." After the detective hung up, I looked at Richard. David hired Gerald Vance. That means he's got access to serious money from somewhere. Or he's desperate enough to promise Vance a percentage of assets he thinks he's going to win in divorce court. Either way, this just became a much bigger fight. Sarah's phone buzzed and her expression changed as she read the screen. "Oh God, Catherine, you need to see this." She turned her phone to show me a Facebook post from Eleanor Morrison, David's mother. It had already been shared 200 times. My son is being persecuted by a vindictive, mentally unstable woman who has spent 23 years manipulating and controlling him. David is a caring, dedicated physician who has done nothing but provide for his ungrateful wife, and now she's trying to destroy him with false accusations because he finally found the courage to leave her. I'm asking everyone who knows David to stand with him during this terrible time and to see this situation for what it really is, a bitter woman's revenge. She posted this publicly, I said, my voice shaking. She just called me mentally unstable to thousands of people. She did, Diane said, already typing on her laptop. And she just made a massive mistake. This is defamation clear as day. Richard, we're adding Eleanor Morrison to the civil suit. Wait, I don't want to sue David's mother. You don't have a choice, Diane said firmly. She just publicly accused you of making false criminal accusations and called you mentally unstable. If we don't respond legally, it establishes a narrative that you're actually the problem. We file a defamation suit immediately, which forces her to either retract the statement or defend it in court with evidence she doesn't have. Do it, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. I'm done being nice to people who treat me like garbage. By noon, Eleanor's post had been shared 800 times, and the comments were vicious. Half the people defended David, calling me a gold digger and worse. The other half defended me, sharing their own stories of abusive marriages and applauding my courage. It was surreal watching strangers debate the intimate details of my life like it was a television show. Then David's sister Amanda called. Unlike Eleanor, Amanda had always been kind to me, one of the few members of David's family who treated me like a person instead of an accessory. Catherine, I'm so sorry. I just saw Mom's post and I'm horrified. That's not okay. None of this is okay. I talked to James and he told me what really happened. I believe you. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you. You have no idea how much that means. I'm going to post my own statement supporting you. Mom's going to be furious, but I don't care. What David did was wrong, and the family circling wagons around him is disgusting. You deserve better. Amanda, you don't have to do that. It'll cause problems with your family. They're already causing problems by defending the indefensible. I'm doing it, Catherine, and I'm not the only one. James is drafting something too, and David's cousin Rachel. We're not going to let Mom turn this into a witch hunt against you. True to her word, Amanda posted an hour later. I love my brother, but I also believe in accountability. What happened to Catherine was wrong, and supporting David doesn't mean ignoring his actions or attacking his victim. Catherine has always been kind to this family, and she deserves our respect and compassion, not public attacks. Eleanor called me directly 10 minutes after Amanda's post went live. I debated not answering, then decided I wanted to hear what she had to say. How dare you turn my children against me, she hissed, before I could even say hello. First you destroy my son's life, and now you're manipulating Amanda and James to take your side. Eleanor. I haven't spoken to Amanda in 3 months until today. She made her own decision based on the facts. Maybe instead of blaming me, you should ask yourself why your own children don't believe David's version of events. Because you've poisoned them. You've always been jealous of how close our family is, and now you're using this situation to drive wedges between us. Your son threw me out of a car on a dark highway and told me he didn't care if I lived or died. There's video evidence, audio recordings, and witness testimony. This isn't manipulation, Eleanor. It's the truth. I don't believe that. David would never do something so cruel. You must have provoked him, driven him to desperation with your behavior. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Eleanor, I'm going to say this once, and then we're done. Your son committed multiple crimes. He's being investigated by the police. He's facing criminal charges. And instead of holding him accountable or encouraging him to make this right, you're attacking me and making excuses for him. That's your choice, but it's the wrong one, and it's going to cost you relationships with your other children. Don't you dare lecture me about my children. I've been a mother for 45 years, and I know my son. He's a good man who made a mistake, and you're a vindictive woman who can't accept that he stopped loving you. He can stop loving me all he wants, Eleanor, but he can't commit crimes and expect no consequences. Goodbye. I hung up while she was still talking and immediately called Richard. Add Eleanor to the defamation suit. I want her to understand that actions have consequences too. At 2 p.m., we released my official statement to the press. Within minutes, it was picked up by every major news outlet. By 2:30, my phone was ringing constantly with interview requests, book deal offers, and messages from domestic violence advocacy groups asking me to speak publicly about my experience. Decline everything, Diane advised. Right now, silence is power. Let David and his family flail around making statements and digging themselves deeper. You stay quiet, dignified, and let the contrast speak for itself. At 3:15, Detective Morrison called again. Mrs. Morrison, your husband just invoked his right to counsel and refused to answer questions. We've placed him under arrest for abandonment and reckless endangerment. He's being processed now and will likely make bail within a few hours. I wanted you to know in case he tries to contact you. Thank you, Detective. What about Vanessa Laurent? We brought her in separately. Unlike your husband, she's been very cooperative. She's given us detailed statements about the abandonment, about financial discussions she and Dr. Morrison had, and about property purchases. She's also agreed to testify if this goes to trial. She flipped on him. Completely. Ms. Laurent is facing potential charges as an accessory, and her attorney negotiated cooperation in exchange for a plea deal. She's throwing your husband under the bus to save herself. I should have felt satisfaction, but instead, I just felt tired. This whole thing was exhausting, the constant drama and revelations and legal maneuvering. I just wanted it to be over. At 4 p.m., the news broke that David had been arrested. The footage of him being led out of the police station in handcuffs, Gerald Vance at his side, looking grim, played on every channel. David looked smaller, somehow diminished without his white coat and stethoscope, and the authority they conveyed. He looked like what he was, a middle-aged man who'd made catastrophically bad choices. My phone rang. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Morrison, this is Gerald Vance. I represent your husband. I'm calling to discuss a potential resolution to both the criminal case and the divorce proceedings. Mr. Vance, I have attorneys. You should speak with them. I'd prefer to speak with you directly, woman to woman, so to speak. I think we can find a solution that benefits everyone and avoids a prolonged, expensive court battle. There is no solution that benefits everyone, Mr. Vance. Your client committed crimes. He's facing the consequences. And in terms of the divorce, there's nothing to negotiate. The assets are mine. They've always been mine. And I have documentation proving it. Mrs. Morrison, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But consider this. A criminal trial will be brutal for both of you. Every detail of your marriage will be dissected publicly. Every argument, every intimate moment, every failure will be examined and judged. Is that really what you want? What I want is accountability, Mr. Vance. And if public scrutiny is the price of that, I'll pay it. Even if it means your financial situation becomes public knowledge, because I have to tell you when it comes out that you've been hiding $40 million from your husband for 23 years, the narrative changes. You stop being the victim and start being the wealthy woman who let her husband think he was the provider while secretly controlling everything. I didn't hide anything, Mr. Vance. I simply didn't correct my husband's assumptions, and I'm not ashamed of my financial independence. If David and his legal team want to try painting me as the villain for being wealthy, they're welcome to try. But it won't change the fact that he committed multiple felonies. Mrs. Morrison, let me be blunt. You're playing a dangerous game. Yes, you have evidence of abandonment, but my client has evidence of emotional manipulation of a wife who deliberately deceived him about her financial status, who set him up to fail. We can make a jury sympathize with a man who finally snapped after years of psychological abuse. I laughed, actually laughed. Mr. Vance, you're threatening to argue that my husband was so psychologically damaged by me having money that he had no choice but to throw me out of a car on a highway. Please make that argument in court. I would love to watch you try. You're making a mistake. No, Mr. Vance. Your client made the mistake. I'm just making sure he pays for it. Goodbye. I hung up and immediately called Richard to report the conversation. He was furious. He had no right to contact you directly. That's a violation of legal ethics. I'm filing a complaint with the Bar Association. Do it. I'm done playing nice with anyone in David's camp. That evening, Sarah came over with Chinese food and found me pacing the hotel room like a caged animal. You need to eat, she said, unpacking containers of lo mein and kung pao chicken. And you need to breathe. Catherine, you're wound so tight you're going to snap. I just keep waiting for the next bomb to drop. The next statement from Eleanor, the next legal threat from Gerald Vance, the next revelation about something David did. When does it end? It ends when the judge signs the divorce decree and David accepts that he lost. That could be weeks or months depending on how hard he wants to fight. But Catherine, you're winning. Every step of the way you're winning. Don't lose sight of that. My phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. Turn on Channel 4. You need to see this. I grabbed the remote and flipped to the local news. The anchor was interviewing someone, and it took me a moment to recognize her. Tricia, the dental hygienist. David's affair from 2 years ago. I was involved with Dr. Morrison for about 4 months. Tricia was saying, her voice shaky but determined. He told me he was separated from his wife, that the marriage was basically over. He bought me expensive gifts, took me to nice restaurants, and made me feel special. Then one day he just ended it with a text message. No explanation, no closure, nothing. Why are you coming forward now? The anchor asked. Because I saw the news about his arrest, and I recognized the pattern. He did the same thing to his wife that he did to me. Made promises, used people, then discarded them when they were no longer convenient. I thought I was the only one. But now I'm seeing there were others, lots of others. And I think people deserve to know who Dr. Morrison really is. The segment cut to a photo of David professional headshot from the hospital website with a caption reading, "Multiple women claim affairs with arrested doctor." Oh my God, I breathed. They're all coming forward. Sarah was scrolling on her phone. It's not just Tricia. There's a woman named Jennifer on Twitter claiming she had a 3-month affair with him last year. And someone named Lisa posted on Facebook about a relationship in 2019. Catherine, this is snowballing. And it was. Over the next 2 hours, 8 different women came forward publicly with stories of affairs with David. Some were long-term relationships, some were one-night stands, but the pattern was consistent. David told them all he was separated or divorced. He promised them all a future together. He used them all and discarded them when the novelty wore off. This is going to destroy what's left of his reputation, Sarah said. Not just as a husband, but as a person. Who wants to be treated by a doctor who's this much of a serial liar? My phone rang again. Marcus this time. Catherine, have you seen the news about all the women? I'm watching it now. Marcus, did you know about all of them? I knew about 5. There were 3 more I suspected but couldn't confirm. But 8. Catherine, your husband was busier than I thought. Ex-husband, I corrected. Or he will be soon. Marcus, does this help our case? Tremendously. It establishes a pattern of deception and manipulation. It shows David's been lying systematically for years, which supports your claim that he was planning to defraud you in the divorce. The more evidence we have of his character, the stronger your case becomes. After we hung up, I sat on the hotel bed and tried to process everything. Just 72 hours ago, I'd been pushed out of a car by a man who thought I was powerless. Now that man was in handcuffs, his reputation in ruins, his career on hold, his family divided, and his former mistresses lining up to expose his lies. Is this what winning feels like? I asked Sarah, because I thought I'd feel more satisfied. You're exhausted and overwhelmed. That's normal. But Catherine, look at what you've accomplished. You've exposed the truth, protected your assets, and held David accountable for crimes he committed. That's not revenge. That's justice. Then why do I feel so empty? Because 23 years of your life just ended in the worst possible way. Because the man you thought you'd grow old with turned out to be a stranger. Because even justified anger is still painful to carry. Catherine, you're allowed to grieve the marriage you thought you had, even while you celebrate escaping the marriage you actually had. I nodded, feeling tears finally come. For the first time since Saturday night, I let myself cry. Not for David, but for myself. For the young woman who'd believed in love and commitment. for the wife who'd tried so hard to make it work, for the years I'd wasted on someone who'd never deserved them. Sarah held me while I cried, and when I finally stopped, she handed me a fortune cookie from the Chinese takeout. "Open it," she said. I cracked it open and read the fortune. "Your patience will be rewarded with unexpected gifts." "See," Sarah said, "even the universe agrees. You waited, you planned, and now you're getting everything you deserve." "I just want peace," I said. "I want this to be over so I can figure out who I am without David defining me." "You'll get there, but first you have to finish what you started. David's not going to go quietly, and neither is his mother or his lawyer. There's still fight left in them, which means you need to keep fighting too." She was right. At 9 p.m., Gerald Vance released a statement to the press. Dr. David Morrison maintains his innocence regarding all criminal charges. The incident on November 14th was a regrettable argument between spouses, not a criminal act. Dr. Morrison deeply loves his wife and hopes they can resolve their differences privately rather than through the courts. We ask the media to respect the family's privacy during this difficult time. "He's trying to spin it as a lover's quarrel," I said, reading the statement on my phone. "He abandoned me on a highway, and now he's calling it a regrettable argument." Diane called immediately. "Don't respond. Let his lawyer's statement sit out there looking ridiculous next to the evidence. Tomorrow we file our response to his divorce counterpetition, and we include every piece of evidence we have. Timeline of affairs, property documents, financial records, everything. We bury him in facts and let the judge see exactly who David Morrison is." "What about Eleanor's defamation? Are we moving forward with that?" "Already filed. She's being served tomorrow. And Catherine, she's going to be furious. Prepare yourself for more public attacks." I was prepared, but it didn't make it easier when Eleanor appeared on the local news. Tuesday morning, tears streaming down her face, talking about how I was persecuting her family. "First, Catherine destroyed my son's marriage and career, and now she's suing me for defending him. This is a vendetta, plain and simple. She's a wealthy, powerful woman, using her resources to crush anyone who stands up to her. I'm a retired teacher on a fixed income, and she's trying to bankrupt me for speaking the truth." "She's good," Diane said when I called her furious. "Playing the poor victim card, making you look like a bully. But Catherine, it's not going to work. We have screenshots of her original post, calling you mentally unstable and accusing you of making false accusations. That's textbook defamation, and no amount of tears changes that." So what do? We stay the course, file our evidence, let the legal process work, and trust that truth wins, because it will. It always does. I wanted to believe her, but as the days progressed and the media circus intensified, I started to wonder if truth was enough. David's supporters were loud and organized, creating social media hashtags and organizing protests outside the courthouse. Eleanor gave interview after interview, painting herself as a grieving mother and me as a monster. And Gerald Vance was everywhere, spinning narratives about misunderstandings and marital disputes, and suggesting that maybe both parties shared blame. But then Wednesday morning brought a development nobody expected. Vanessa Laurent held a press conference. Standing outside her attorney's office, looking small and scared, Vanessa read from a prepared statement. "I was involved in a relationship with Dr. David Morrison for approximately 8 months. He told me he was separated from his wife and planning to divorce. Based on those representations, I made financial and personal decisions that I now regret. On the night of November 14th, I was present in Dr. Morrison's vehicle when he forcibly removed his wife and abandoned her on Highway 72. I witnessed this incident and did nothing to stop it. For that, I am deeply sorry." She looked up from her paper directly at the cameras. "I'm cooperating fully with law enforcement because what I witnessed was wrong, and I want to take responsibility for my part in it. To Mrs. Morrison, I apologize for the pain I've caused you and for my participation in your husband's deception. I hope you can find peace and healing." The press conference exploded into shouted questions, but Vanessa's attorney quickly ushered her inside without taking any. My phone rang immediately. Richard, Sarah Marcus, and Diane all trying to reach me at once. I answered Richard first. "Did you see it?" "I saw it. Richard, she just tanked David's entire defense. He can't claim it was a misunderstanding or an argument when his co-conspirator just admitted on camera that he forcibly removed me from the vehicle. She did more than that. She established herself as a credible witness who's taking responsibility. That makes her testimony devastating. David's criminal defense just went from difficult to nearly impossible, and it was true. By Thursday, the tide had completely turned. Major news outlets picked up the story not as a local domestic dispute, but as a national conversation about domestic violence, gaslighting, and financial abuse. I started receiving messages from women across the country sharing their own stories, thanking me for being brave, telling me I'd inspired them to leave their own toxic marriages. Friday morning, exactly 1 week after David had pushed me out of that car, I woke up to a text from Detective Morrison. Mrs. Morrison, you should know that Dr. Morrison's attorneys have approached the DA about a plea deal. They're looking at reduced charges in exchange for a guilty plea. Wanted to give you a heads up before it becomes official. I sat up in bed reading the text 3 times to make sure I understood. David was ready to plead guilty. After all his lawyer's statements about innocence and misunderstandings, he was admitting he'd committed crimes. I called Richard immediately. I heard, he said. The DA called me an hour ago. They're offering a deal, reckless endangerment instead of abandonment, 18 months probation instead of jail time, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order, keeping David away from you. And what do they want from me? Your agreement not to pursue additional charges and your cooperation in the criminal case. Catherine, I think you should take it. This gets you legal protection, forces David to admit wrongdoing, and lets us move forward with the divorce without the distraction of a criminal trial. What about accountability? 18 months probation feels light for what he did. It comes with a felony conviction. That stays on his record forever. It affects his medical license, his hospital privileges, his ability to get loans or rent property. Catherine, a felony conviction will follow him for the rest of his life. That's not nothing. I thought about it, weighing my need for justice against my need for peace. I'll agree on one condition. David makes a public statement admitting what he did and apologizing. No spin, no excuses, just the truth. I'll make it part of the plea agreement. Catherine, this is almost over. We're so close. That afternoon, David's new divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Holmes, who'd replaced Gerald Vance on the civil case, called Richard to discuss settlement. My client is prepared to acknowledge that all disputed property belongs solely to Mrs. Morrison. He's dropping all claims to the house, the Aspen property, and any shared assets. In exchange, he's asking that Mrs. Morrison release the lien on the Scottsdale property and allow him to relocate his medical practice without interference. Absolutely not, I said when Richard relayed the offer. He gets nothing. No favorable terms, no concessions, no help relocating. He made his choices, now he lives with them. Catherine, if we reject every offer, this could drag on for months. I don't care. I'm not helping the man who tried to destroy me rebuild his life. He can figure out his own solutions. But Saturday brought news that changed everything. David's hospital announced they were terminating his privileges, effective immediately. Not suspending, terminating. The board had conducted an investigation and determined that his conduct was incompatible with their values and posed a risk to patient safety and institutional reputation. Without hospital privileges, David couldn't practice orthopedic surgery. His career, the thing he'd valued more than our marriage, more than his integrity, more than anything, was over. When Richard called with the news, his voice was somber. Catherine, this is it. David has nothing left. No career, no assets, no future in medicine. He's completely destroyed. And I waited for the satisfaction to come, the vindication, the sense that justice had been served. But all I felt was tired. Schedule the settlement meeting, I told Richard. Let's end this. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning at Richard's office. I arrived early, dressed in the same black suit I'd worn the day after David abandoned me, my father's Rolex heavy on my wrist. Sarah came with me for moral support, though Richard had made it clear she'd have to wait outside during the actual negotiations. How do you feel? Sarah asked as we rode the elevator up to the 14th floor. Numb. I thought I'd feel triumphant or vindicated, but I just feel empty. Like I've spent 2 years preparing for war, and now that I've won, I don't know what to do with peacetime. You'll figure it out. But Catherine, today you get to see David face the consequences of everything he did. That matters. Richard was waiting in the conference room with Patricia Holmes, who looked exhausted in a way that suggested her client had been extremely difficult to manage. She stood when I entered and extended her hand. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Patricia Holmes. I've taken over your husband's divorce case. I want to say up front that my client has been, shall we say, resistant to accepting reality. But after losing his hospital privileges, he's finally willing to discuss reasonable terms." "Reasonable for him or reasonable for me?" I asked, taking my seat. "Reasonable for both parties. Mrs. Morrison, my client, is facing criminal conviction, loss of career, and complete financial devastation. What you're asking for, total forfeiture of all assets and full responsibility for debts, would leave him destitute and homeless. Surely there's some middle ground." "The middle ground is that David gets to keep his medical license and his freedom. Those are both more than he deserves, so I consider them generous concessions." "Catherine," Richard said gently, "perhaps we should hear their full offer before we respond." Patricia opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "My client proposes the following. He acknowledges Mrs. Morrison's sole ownership of the marital residence, the Aspen property, and all investment accounts in her name. He requests a division of his medical practice equipment and assets, which have a combined value of approximately $300,000. He also requests that Mrs. Morrison release her lien on the Scottsdale property and allow him to retain a portion of funds currently in joint accounts to facilitate relocation." I didn't even look at the document. "No. Mrs. Morrison, please consider that my client needs some resources to rebuild his life. He's lost everything. Surely you can afford to be merciful." "Merciful. Your client threw me out of a car on a dark highway and told me he didn't care if I lived or died. Where was his mercy then?" Patricia's expression shifted, becoming harder. "Mrs. Morrison, my client made a terrible mistake in a moment of anger. But you've been deceiving him for 23 years about your financial status. You let him believe he was the provider while you secretly controlled millions. That's psychological manipulation of the highest order." "I didn't deceive anyone. I simply didn't correct my husband's assumptions. David never asked about my finances, never showed interest in my life beyond what I could do for him. His ignorance was willful, not my deception. A judge might see it differently, particularly when we present evidence that you deliberately set up your husband to fail, that you orchestrated this entire situation to maximize his humiliation and your financial gain." Richard leaned forward. "Patricia, are you seriously threatening to argue that Catherine is at fault for protecting assets she legally owned before the marriage, assets her father wisely structured to prevent exactly the kind of fraudulent claims your client was planning? I'm saying that a sympathetic presentation of my client's position could result in a more favorable division of assets than you're currently offering. Dr. Morrison was a faithful husband for over 20 years before this relationship deteriorated. He deserves consideration for his contributions to the marriage." I laughed, actually laughed. "Faithful Patricia, I have documented evidence of at least 8 affairs over the past 5 years alone. Your client was many things, but faithful wasn't one of them." The door opened and David walked in. He looked terrible, worse than I'd ever seen him. Unshaven, wearing a wrinkled shirt, eyes red-rimmed and desperate. He looked at me and I saw something that might have been genuine remorse or might have been panic at losing everything. With David, it was always hard to tell. "Catherine, please, can we talk about this reasonably?" "You're not supposed to contact her directly," Richard said sharply. "You have a restraining order pending. It's not official yet, and I'm not threatening her, I'm begging her. Catherine, I know I screwed up. I know what I did was unforgivable. But please don't destroy me completely. I'm losing my career, my reputation, everything. Just let me have enough to start over somewhere else, please." I looked at him. This man I'd spent half my life with, and tried to find some remnant of feeling. Love, hate, pity, anything. But there was nothing. He was a stranger who'd once shared my bed and my name, and now he was just another problem to solve. David, you tried to leave me on a highway to die or disappear or suffer. You didn't care which. You planned to take everything I owned and claim you'd earned it. You told me I was worthless, that I'd contributed nothing, that I was lucky you'd tolerated me as long as you had. And now you want mercy. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. No, you said things you absolutely meant. You just didn't expect consequences. David, you thought I was powerless. You thought you could discard me like trash and walk away to your new life with Vanessa without any accountability. The only thing you regret is that I wasn't actually powerless. Catherine, I loved you. I know you don't believe that now, but I did. I do. I just made terrible choices. You didn't love me, David. You loved the idea of me, the convenient wife who didn't ask questions or make demands. And when I stopped being convenient, you tried to destroy me. That's not love. That's ownership. Patricia cleared her throat. Perhaps we could discuss specific terms rather than rehashing past grievances, Mrs. Hull. Morrison, what would it take for you to agree to a settlement today? I looked at Richard, who nodded slightly. We'd discussed this scenario, the possibility that David would show up and try emotional manipulation. Richard had advised me to have a final offer ready, something that gave David the minimum he needed to survive while ensuring I kept everything I was entitled to. David gets nothing from me, I said clearly. No money, no property, no assistance. The house is mine. Aspen is mine. All investment accounts in my name are mine. The Scottsdale lien stays in place, and I will foreclose if payments are missed. His medical practice equipment is his to keep or sell as he chooses, but he has 30 days to vacate the building. After that, I'm renting to a new tenant. That leaves him homeless and broke, Patricia protested. That leaves him with the equipment from his practice, which he can sell for capital, and his medical license, which he can use to find work in another state. David's a talented surgeon. He'll figure something out. Just not here and not with my help. What about joint debts? Credit cards, the car loans. I reviewed the statements. Every charge on those cards was David's spending. Every car is registered in his name. Those are his debts, not mine. David's face was crumbling. Catherine, I have $70,000 in credit card debt. I can't pay that without income. You should have thought of that before you destroyed your career. David, you made choice after choice that led here. The affairs, the lying, the asset concealment, the abandonment. Every single one was a choice you made freely. I'm not responsible for the consequences of your choices. I'll file for bankruptcy then. I'll destroy my credit, lose everything and start from zero. That's your right. But you're not taking anything of mine with you when you do it. Patricia was scribbling notes furiously. Mrs. Morrison, this is extremely harsh. Most divorce settlements include some provision for the lower-earning spouse, even in fault situations. Most divorces don't involve criminal charges and documented attempts at fraud. David's not a lower-earning spouse, Patricia. He's a felon who tried to steal from me. The fact that he's getting to keep anything at all is more generosity than he deserves. David stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. Fine. You win, Catherine. You get everything, I get nothing, and you can spend the rest of your life being bitter and alone with your money. I hope it makes you happy. Happier than staying married to you would have, I said evenly. Patricia drafted the settlement agreement based on the terms I outlined. David has 48 hours to sign it. After that, we go to trial, and I make sure every ugly detail of his affairs and his fraud attempts becomes public record. His choice. David walked out without another word. Patricia gathered her documents, her expression tight with professional frustration. Mrs. Morrison, you're within your legal rights, but I want you to know that what you're doing is cruel. My client made mistakes, but he's still a human being who deserves basic dignity. Your client abandoned his wife on a dark highway. He doesn't get to lecture me about dignity. After Patricia left, Richard closed the door and looked at me carefully. Are you sure about this? Because there's no going back once he signs those papers. I'm sure. Richard, if I give David anything, it sends the message that his behavior was acceptable as long as he apologizes afterward. I'm not doing that. He tried to destroy me, and he failed. Now he gets to live with that failure. Okay, I'll draft the agreement and send it to Patricia by end of day. Catherine, this should be over by the end of the week. I walked out of Richard's office and found Sarah waiting in the lobby. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. How bad was it? He begged. He actually begged me to give him money to start over. Sarah, the man who told me I was worthless and contributed nothing, now wants me to fund his new life. What did you say? I said no. To everything. He gets nothing except what he brought into the marriage, which is essentially just his medical equipment and his debts. Good. He deserves worse. We were walking to the elevator when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Morrison, this is Jennifer Caldwell. You don't know me, but I'm one of the women who came forward about having an affair with your husband. I wanted to call and apologize personally. I stopped walking, surprised. Miss Caldwell, you don't owe me an apology. David lied to you the same way he lied to me. I know, but I still feel terrible. I was the other woman in your marriage, even if I didn't know it. I helped damage your relationship. Miss Caldwell, my marriage was damaged long before you entered the picture. David's the one who made vows to me and broke them. You made no promises to me. Thank you for saying that. I've been carrying so much guilt. But Mrs. Morrison, there's another reason I called. I'm a nurse at Presbyterian, and I heard something today that I thought you should know. The hospital didn't just terminate David's privileges. They're investigating whether he falsified patient records to cover up surgical mistakes. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of mistakes? I don't have details, but there's talk of malpractice complaints that were buried, complications that weren't properly documented. If it's true, this goes way beyond marital problems. This is criminal fraud in a medical context. Does David know they're investigating? I don't think so. It just started this morning. But Mrs. Morrison, if they find evidence of medical fraud, he could lose his license entirely, not just at Presbyterian, everywhere. After we hung up, I immediately called Richard and relayed the information. Jesus, he breathed. If David's been falsifying medical records, that's a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. And it would explain why the hospital moved so fast to terminate him. They're trying to distance themselves before the scandal breaks. Richard, if he loses his medical license, he has nothing. No career, no income potential, nothing to sell or leverage. He'll be completely ruined. Yes, and Catherine, that's not your fault. If David committed medical fraud, that's on him. You didn't make him do that. But somehow it felt like my fault anyway. That night alone in the hotel room that had become my temporary home, I found myself thinking about the David I'd married. The charming young resident who'd brought me coffee during long study sessions. The man who'd cried at our wedding and promised to love me forever. Where had that person gone, or had he ever really existed? My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Catherine, I'm so sorry about what happened at the settlement meeting. David called Mom crying and she's planning another press conference. I wanted to warn you. I called Amanda immediately. What's Eleanor going to say? That you're a heartless monster who's destroying her son out of spite. She's completely irrational, Catherine. James and I have tried to reason with her, but she refuses to see that David brought this on himself. Let her have her press conference. At this point, nothing she says can make this worse. But I was wrong. Eleanor's press conference Wednesday morning was spectacular in its viciousness. Standing outside a church flanked by David's colleagues and friends, she accused me of being a con artist who trapped her son in a marriage based on lies. Catherine Westbrook Morrison is a wealthy heiress who pretended to be a simple working woman to ensnare my son. Eleanor said, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion. For 23 years, she deceived him, manipulated him, and used her secret wealth to control him. When he finally tried to escape this toxic relationship, she used her money and power to destroy him. She's taken his career, his home, his future, everything. And why? Because he fell in love with someone else. Because he wanted to be free. The reporters ate it up, asking questions about my family wealth, my father's business dealings, whether I'd deliberately targeted David for marriage. Eleanor had an answer for everything, painting me as a calculating predator, and David as an innocent victim. Diane called me immediately after the press conference ended. Catherine, we need to respond. This narrative is dangerous. She's flipping the script, making you the villain. Let her. Anyone who knows the facts knows she's lying. Not everyone knows the facts, and the court of public opinion matters. If enough people believe Eleanor's version, it creates pressure on the actual court to be lenient with David. Then what do you suggest? A press conference of your own. Tomorrow morning. You tell your story, show the evidence, and let people see the real Catherine Morrison. Not the monster Eleanor's describing, but the woman who survived abandonment and fought back. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hide in my hotel room until this was all over. But I thought about all the women who'd reached out to me who'd shared their own stories of abuse and manipulation. I thought about the message it would send if I let Eleanor's lies stand unchallenged. Okay, schedule it. Thursday morning, I stood in front of a dozen cameras and twice as many reporters, my hands shaking but my voice steady. My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm here to set the record straight. On November 14th, my husband of 23 years forcibly removed me from his vehicle and abandoned me on a dark highway with no phone, no money, and no way to get help. This incident was captured on video and has resulted in criminal charges. Everything else is detail, but that core fact is undeniable. I paused, making eye contact with the reporters. There's been a lot of discussion about my financial situation, about wealth I supposedly hid from my husband. The truth is simpler and less dramatic. I inherited money from my father, money that was placed in a trust to protect it. I never lied about this. I simply didn't discuss it because my husband never asked. He made assumptions about our financial situation based on his own ego and his need to see himself as the provider. Those assumptions were his choice, not my deception. Mrs. Morrison, a reporter called out, did you ever correct those assumptions? Did you ever tell your husband you were wealthy? I told him my father had money. I told him I had a trust. He never asked for details because he wasn't interested in my financial independence. He was interested in maintaining a narrative where he was successful and I was dependent. That narrative suited him, so I let him have it. But isn't that manipulation? Letting someone believe a lie? I didn't let him believe a lie. I let him believe what he wanted to believe. There's a difference. My husband had access to our tax returns, our bank statements, our financial records. If he'd really looked, he would have seen the trust income. He didn't look because he didn't care. His ignorance was willful. Another reporter spoke up. What do you say to accusations that you've been vindictive in the divorce, taking everything and leaving your husband destitute? I say that I'm keeping what was always mine. The house I bought before our marriage, the property I inherited, the assets I accumulated through my own financial management. I'm not taking anything from David because there's nothing of David's to take. His medical practice equipment is his to keep. His career, damaged as it is by his own choices, is his to rebuild. I'm not stopping him from starting over. I'm just not funding it. Mrs. Morrison, your mother-in-law has called you heartless. How do you respond? I took a breath, steadying myself. Eleanor Morrison has spent 23 years treating me with contempt. She's never approved of me, never accepted me, never treated me as worthy of her son. Now that her son has been exposed as an adulterer and a criminal, she's desperate to blame someone other than him. I'm a convenient target, but her opinion of me has never mattered, and it doesn't start mattering now. What do you want people to understand about domestic violence? I want people to understand that it doesn't always look like black eyes and broken bones. Sometimes it looks like a husband who controls finances while claiming to be generous. Sometimes it looks like gaslighting and manipulation and making someone believe they're worthless. And sometimes it looks like being thrown out of a car on a dark highway because you're no longer convenient. Abuse takes many forms, and all of them are unacceptable. Are you satisfied with the criminal charges against your husband? I'm satisfied that accountability is happening. Whether David serves jail time or probation is up to the courts. What matters to me is that the system recognized what he did was wrong and is treating it as such. One last question, Mrs. Morrison. Do you regret marrying David Morrison? I thought about that, really thought about it. I regret that the marriage ended the way it did. I regret the years I wasted trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken. But I don't regret the experience because it taught me who I am and what I'm capable of. I survived something that was designed to destroy me, and I came out stronger. That's not nothing. The press conference ended, and I walked back to Richard's car, exhausted but lighter somehow. Diane was beaming. That was perfect. Dignified, honest, strong. Catherine, you just changed the narrative completely. And she was right. By that evening, the coverage had shifted. Instead of rich woman destroys husband, the stories were about domestic violence, survivor fights back. Instead of questioning my motives, reporters were investigating David's medical practice and finding evidence of the complaints Jennifer had mentioned. Friday morning brought the news I'd been waiting for. David signed the settlement agreement. No negotiation, no counteroffer, just his signature on the dotted line, acknowledging that everything we'd accumulated belonged to me, and he had no claim to any of it. "It's over," Richard said when he called to tell me. "Catherine, you're officially free. The divorce will be final in 30 days, but the settlement is locked in. He can't change his mind or fight it. You won." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. 23 years of my life reduced to legal documents and property divisions. A marriage that had started with promises and hope, ending with lawyers and restraining orders. That afternoon, I went to see the house. My house, as it had always legally been, but it felt strange walking up the driveway knowing David would never come home here again. I used my key to open the front door and stepped into the silence. Everything looked the same. The furniture we'd chosen together, the photos on the walls, the kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals. But it all felt empty now, like a museum display of a life that no longer existed. I walked through each room, saying goodbye to the woman I'd been in these spaces. The young bride in the master bedroom, the hopeful wife in the kitchen, the lonely woman in the guest room where I'd slept more and more frequently in the final years. All versions of myself I was leaving behind. My phone rang. "Marcus. Catherine, you need to see this. Channel 7 just broke a story about David. The hospital investigation found evidence of at least 12 instances of falsified medical records over the past 3 years. They're turning everything over to the medical board and the district attorney." I sat down on the living room couch, the same couch where David and I had watched movies and made plans and pretended we were happy. 12 instances. At minimum. Catherine, there may be more. The medical board is launching a full audit of every surgery he performed in the last 5 years. If they find a pattern of negligence or fraud, he'll lose his license permanently. He'll never practice medicine again. That's his career. That's everything he worked for. That's everything he threw away when he started cutting corners and covering mistakes. Catherine, this isn't your fault. You didn't make him falsify records. But it felt connected somehow. David's whole life had been built on lies. Lies to me about fidelity, lies to patients about complications, lies to himself about who he really was. And now all those lies were catching up to him at once. Saturday morning, David called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Catherine?" His voice was wrecked, barely recognizable. "Have you seen the news?" "I've seen it. They're going to take my license. Everything I worked for my entire career gone. I'll never operate again." "David, if you falsified patient records, you deserve to lose your license. You put people's lives at risk." I made mistakes. I tried to fix them quietly instead of reporting them properly. I know that was wrong, but I was scared of lawsuits, scared of losing everything. And now I'm losing it anyway. You're losing it because you chose to lie instead of taking responsibility. Just like you chose to cheat instead of fixing our marriage. Just like you chose to abandon me instead of having an honest conversation about divorce. David, your whole life has been about taking shortcuts and avoiding consequences. This is what happens when the consequences finally catch up. I know. God. Catherine, I know. And I'm so sorry. For everything. For the affairs, for how I treated you for that night on the highway. I was cruel and stupid, and I destroyed everything good in my life. Yes, you did. Can I ask you something? Do you hate me? I thought about it, really examined my feelings. No, I don't hate you, David. I don't feel anything for you at all anymore. You're just someone I used to know who made terrible choices. I hope you figure out how to build a better life, but I won't be part of it. I understand. Catherine, for what it's worth, you deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty and respect and a husband who appreciated you. I'm sorry I wasn't that person. So am I. Goodbye, David. I hung up and blocked his number. That chapter was closed, and I had no intention of reopening it. Sunday morning, I woke up in the hotel room and realized I couldn't stay there anymore. It was time to go home to reclaim the space David and I had shared and make it mine alone. I packed my things, checked out, and drove to the house. Sarah met me there with coffee and pastries and helped me start the process of erasing David from the space. We removed his clothes from the closet, boxed up his toiletries, took down photos that showed him. By evening, the house looked different, emptier, but more honest. "What are you going to do with all this space?" Sarah asked, looking around the 4-bedroom house. "I have no idea. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll finally write that book I've been thinking about. Maybe I'll just sit here and figure out who Catherine Morrison is when she's not defined by being David's wife. Whoever she is, I think she's going to be amazing." Monday morning brought the final piece of closure. The medical board suspended David's license pending the outcome of their investigation. The news reported that he'd already left the state, relocating to somewhere quiet where he could avoid the media attention. Vanessa had also disappeared her real estate license, suspended her reputation, in ruins. Eleanor made one final statement to the press, still insisting her son was innocent and I was to blame. But nobody was listening anymore. The evidence was too clear, the pattern too obvious. David had destroyed himself, and no amount of a mother's denial could change that. Tuesday afternoon, Richard called with the final news. The judge signed the divorce decree. "Catherine, you're officially no longer married to David Morrison. You're free." I hung up and sat in my living room in my house, surrounded by my things, and tried to process what freedom felt like. After 23 years of performance and pretending I could finally just be myself, whoever that was, my phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Congratulations on your divorce. I know that sounds weird, but I mean it. You're free of David and free of this family's dysfunction. Go live an amazing life. You've earned it." I texted back a thank you and then did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a legal document or a financial report, but a story, my story, about the girl who married too young, the woman who lost herself in someone else's narrative, and the survivor who took everything back. I wrote for hours, the words pouring out faster than I could type. And somewhere in those pages I found her. Catherine Westbrook Morrison. Not David's wife, not a victim, not a villain. Just a woman who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side, stronger, wiser, and finally completely free. The writing became my therapy over the next few weeks. Every morning I'd wake up, make coffee in the kitchen that was finally just mine, and sit at my father's old desk writing about everything that had happened. Not just the divorce and the abandonment, but the years leading up to it. The slow erosion of self that happens when you spend 2 decades trying to be what someone else needs instead of who you really are. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from a literary agent named Rebecca Chen, who'd somehow gotten hold of my manuscript through a mutual friend. "Mrs. Morrison, I don't usually cold call potential clients, but I read the first 50 pages of your memoir, and I couldn't stop. This is powerful stuff. Raw, honest, and unfortunately incredibly relatable. Have you thought about publishing this? I'm just writing it for myself, to process everything. I think you should write it for the thousands of women who are living versions of your story right now, the ones who feel trapped, who think they have no options, who believe they're powerless. Catherine, your story shows them that they're not, that they can fight back and win." "Rebecca, I'm not a writer, I'm just someone with a story. The best writers are people with stories that need to be told. Let me send this to a few publishers. No commitment, just see what happens. If nothing else, you'll know there was interest." I agreed, mostly because I couldn't think of a reason to say no. 2 weeks later, Rebecca called back with news that 3 major publishers wanted to bid on the book. By the end of the month, I had a 6-figure book deal and a deadline 6 months away. "You're going to be famous," Sarah said when I told her over dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. "Like actually famous. Your face is going to be on book covers and morning shows." "I don't want to be famous. I just want to tell the truth. Sometimes those things come together whether you want them to or not. But Catherine, this is good. You're taking control of your narrative instead of letting David or Eleanor or anyone else define you." She was right, but it was terrifying. Writing in private was one thing. Publishing my story for the world to read was something else entirely. The fear got worse when I received my first piece of hate mail. Someone had found my address and sent a letter calling me a vindictive bitch who'd destroyed a good man's life for no reason. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing all the ways I was supposedly evil, and concluding with a suggestion that I deserved worse than what David had done to me. I showed it to Marcus, who immediately increased security at my house and started screening my mail. "This is from a woman," he said, examining the handwriting. "Probably someone who identifies with David's narrative thinks you're the villain. Catherine, you need to be careful. Fame brings out crazy people." "I'm not famous. I'm just divorced." "You're about to be very famous, and some people are going to love you for your story, but others are going to hate you for it. That's the price of going public." He was right. When the publisher released the book announcement with a brief synopsis, the internet exploded. Half the comments were supportive women sharing their own stories and thanking me for speaking out. The other half were vicious, accusing me of exaggerating, lying, or manipulating the situation for profit. Eleanor gave another press conference, this one, announcing that she was writing her own book to counter my false narrative. She'd found a publisher willing to take on A Mother's Defense: The Truth About David Morrison, and planned to release it the same month as mine. "Let her," Diane advised when I called in a panic. "Eleanor's book will sell maybe 10,000 copies to people who already believe David's a victim. Yours is going to sell hundreds of thousands because it's the truth and people can feel that. Don't let her distract you." But it was hard not to be distracted when Eleanor started appearing on talk shows crying about how I'd destroyed her family and stolen her grandchildren. The grandchildren part was particularly galling since David and I had never had children, something Eleanor had blamed me for endlessly during our marriage. "She's literally making things up now," Amanda said when she called to apologize for her mother's behavior. "Catherine, James, and I are completely on your side. We've told Mom to stop, but she's obsessed. I think she genuinely believes David's innocent, and you're some kind of mastermind villain." "Let me guess, she's also saying I somehow orchestrated the medical board investigation." "Actually, yes. She claims you bribed someone at the hospital to fabricate evidence against David. It's completely unhinged, but she's found an audience of people who want to believe it." The stress of Eleanor's campaign was getting to me. I started having nightmares about the night David abandoned me, waking up in cold sweats, convinced I was still on that dark highway. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Lee, who Sarah had recommended, said I was experiencing delayed trauma response. "You were in survival mode for so long that you didn't have time to process what happened. Now that you're safe and the immediate danger is over, your brain is finally dealing with the trauma, the nightmares, the anxiety, the hypervigilance. All of it is normal, given what you survived." "How long does it last?" "It varies. But Catherine, you're doing the work. You're writing, you're in therapy, you're building a new life. The healing isn't linear, but it is happening." 2 months after the divorce, I got unexpected news from Richard. David was trying to appeal the settlement, claiming he'd signed under duress and without full understanding of the terms. He's arguing that losing his medical license constituted a material change in circumstances that makes the settlement unconscionable, Richard explained. Basically, he says, if he'd known he was going to lose his career, he never would have agreed to give you everything. Can he do that? Can he actually reverse the settlement? He can try. But Catherine's settlements signed by both parties with legal representation are very difficult to overturn. The bar for proving duress is extremely high. He'd need to show that you or I threatened him, which we didn't, or that he was mentally incompetent when he signed, which his own lawyer will contradict. So this is just David being desperate. Exactly. His new attorney is probably telling him he has a shot, but really they're just billing hours. This will get dismissed, but it'll take a few months and cost him money he doesn't have. The appeal attempt made headlines with Eleanor immediately using it as proof that I'd coerced David into an unfair settlement. She appeared on 3 different news programs in 1 week, each time more emotional than the last, claiming her son had been victimized by the legal system and my wealth. Then something unexpected happened. One of David's former patients came forward with a malpractice lawsuit. Maria Gonzalez, a 52-year-old teacher, claimed that David had botched her knee replacement surgery 3 years ago and then falsified records to cover up the complications. She'd been in chronic pain ever since, unable to work, and only recently discovered through the hospital investigation that David had documented the surgery as successful when it clearly wasn't. "This is going to destroy what's left of his reputation," Marcus said, showing me the news coverage. "Catherine, there are rumors of at least 6 more patients preparing to file suit. David's looking at millions in liability." "He doesn't have millions. He doesn't have anything." "Which is why they'll go after his malpractice insurance, and when that runs out, they'll try to prove he acted with criminal intent, which would void the coverage. If they succeed, David could be personally liable for damages he can't possibly pay." I should have felt vindicated. This was David facing consequences for his actions, accountability for the lies he'd told and the corners he'd cut. But instead, I just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that so many people had been hurt by one man's arrogance and deception. Maria Gonzalez called me directly one afternoon. I don't know how she got my number, but when I answered and she introduced herself, I didn't hang up. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't exposed your husband, if you hadn't fought back, I never would have known what really happened to me. The hospital investigation uncovered the truth about my surgery, and now I finally have answers after 3 years of pain. I'm so sorry for what you went through. It's not your fault. But Mrs. Morrison, can I ask you something? Did you know about the medical fraud?" "No, I didn't know until after I'd already filed for divorce. Maria, if I'd known what David was doing to patients, I would have reported him immediately. I may have stayed too long in a bad marriage, but I never would have protected him from criminal liability. I believe you, and I want you to know that reading about your story gave me courage to come forward with mine. You showed me that powerful men can be held accountable, that victims don't have to stay silent." After we hung up, I cried for the first time in weeks. Not for David or our marriage, but for all the people he'd hurt. For Maria and her chronic pain. For the other patients who'd trusted him and been betrayed. For Vanessa and the other women he'd lied to. Even for Eleanor, who loved her son so much, she couldn't see what he really was. The book writing became harder after that. I'd been focused on my own story, my own survival, but now I understood that this was bigger than just me. David's capacity for deception hadn't been limited to our marriage. It had infected every part of his life, hurting dozens or maybe hundreds of people along the way. I called Rebecca and asked if I could expand the book's scope to include interviews with David's other victims. She loved the idea. It makes the story universal instead of personal, shows the pattern of narcissistic behavior and how it manifests across different relationships. Catherine, this could be really powerful. Over the next month, I interviewed 8 of David's former affair partners and 4 of his patients who'd experienced complications. Each conversation was heartbreaking and illuminating. The women David had dated all described the same pattern: intense initial attention, promises of a future together, then sudden disappearance when they became inconvenient or demanding. The patients described a doctor who seemed competent at first, but became defensive and dismissive when they reported problems. One interview particularly stuck with me. Jessica, the colleague David had dated 5 years ago, met me at a coffee shop and told me about the abortion she'd had after David got her pregnant, and insisted he couldn't have a child with her because it would complicate the divorce he was supposedly going through. "I believed him," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "I believed I was special, that we had something real. I ended a pregnancy because he said we'd have children together once he was free. Then 2 weeks after the abortion, he stopped returning my calls. I saw him in the hospital cafeteria with another woman, and he pretended he didn't know me. Jessica, I'm so sorry. I blamed myself for years. Thought I'd misread the relationship and too clingy scared him off. Now I know he was never going to leave you. He was never getting divorced. He just said whatever he needed to say to get what he wanted, and I lost a baby because I believed his lies." I included Jessica's story in the book with her permission, and watching her read the draft was cathartic for both of us. "Thank you for believing me," she said, "for not judging me or making me feel stupid for falling for him. Jessica, we all fell for him. That's what narcissists do. They find what we need and they become that person until we're invested, then they show their true selves, You're not stupid. You're human. 4 months into the book writing process, I got a call from Detective Morrison with surprising news. David had been arrested again this time for insurance fraud related to the falsified medical records. Apparently, he'd been billing insurance companies for procedures he hadn't actually performed and documenting complications as pre-existing conditions to avoid liability. The total fraud is estimated at over $2 million spanning 5 years, the detective said. Mrs. Morrison, your ex-husband is looking at serious federal charges. This isn't probation territory anymore. This is prison. How long? If convicted on all counts, 10 to 15 years potentially. The federal prosecutors are very interested in making an example of healthcare fraud. I sat down heavily processing the information. David, who'd always been so proud of his career and his status, was facing a decade in federal prison. Eleanor's response was predictable. Another press conference, more tears, more accusations that I'd somehow orchestrated this to destroy David. But this time, the media wasn't buying it. The evidence was too clear, the fraud too extensive. Even Eleanor's supporters were backing away. Amanda called me that night. Catherine, Mom's had a breakdown. She's been hospitalized for exhaustion and stress. James and I are trying to get her into therapy, but she's refusing. She genuinely cannot accept that David did these things. I'm sorry, Amanda. I know she's your mother. She is, but she's also wrong. Catherine, I want you to know that James and I are going to testify at David's trial if we're called. We're going to tell the truth about his character, his lies, everything. We're done protecting him. That's going to destroy your relationship with your mother. Our relationship with Mom is already destroyed. She chose David's fiction over reality, and we can't go along with that anymore. Some of us have to stand for the truth. David's criminal trial was scheduled for 8 months out, which meant my book would be published before he was convicted. My publisher was thrilled, seeing it as perfect timing to drive sales. I felt sick about the whole thing. You're not exploiting his crimes, Dr. Lee reminded me during our weekly session. You're telling your story, which happens to intersect with his criminal behavior. Those are separate things, Catherine. Don't let guilt confuse them. But the guilt was there anyway. Guilt that I hadn't seen the medical fraud earlier. Guilt that patients had been hurt while I was focused on my own situation. Guilt that maybe if I'd been a better wife or a more attentive partner, I would have noticed something was wrong. That's not how this works, Sarah said firmly when I confessed these feelings to her over wine one evening. David's choices are not your responsibility. You didn't make him falsify records or commit fraud. He did that himself. And he did it because he's fundamentally selfish and dishonest. Stop taking ownership of his failures. The book was finished in early spring, 6 months after I'd started writing it. Reading the final manuscript was surreal, seeing my life reduced to 300 pages of prose and dialogue. But it was honest, brutally so, and I hoped it would help someone. Publication day arrived in late May, almost exactly 1 year after David had abandoned me on that highway. The book, titled Powerless: How I Discovered My Strength When My Husband Threw Me Away, debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. The publicity tour was exhausting. Morning shows, podcasts, book signings, all of it requiring me to relive the worst moments of my life over and over for audiences who wanted the drama and the details. But between the painful interviews were moments of connection. Women who waited in line for hours to tell me my story had saved them. Men who apologized for their own past behavior after seeing themselves in David's actions. Therapists who said they were recommending the book to clients struggling with emotional abuse. One signing in particular stayed with me. A young woman, maybe 25, approached the table with tears streaming down her face. I was going to go back to him, she said. My boyfriend, he threw my phone in the lake during an argument and left me stranded at a park. I was going to forgive him because he apologized and said he'd been stressed. But then I read your book, and I realized that's what David did to you, just a smaller version. And if I forgive this, what comes next, thank you for showing me I deserve better. You do deserve better, I told her. Never let anyone make you think you don't. Eleanor's book came out 2 weeks after mine, and the contrast was stark. Where mine had climbed to #1 on the bestseller list, hers barely cracked the top 50. Reviews were scathing, calling it a delusional mother's attempt to rewrite reality. Eleanor did a small book tour, but was consistently challenged by interviewers who'd read my book and had hard questions about David's documented behavior. The most satisfying moment came when Eleanor appeared on a major morning show, and the host confronted her with evidence from the medical board investigation. "Mrs. Morrison, your book claims your son is innocent and was framed by his ex-wife, but we have documents showing 12 instances of falsified medical records that have nothing to do with Catherine Morrison." "How do you explain that?" Eleanor stammered, her carefully constructed narrative falling apart on live television. Those are mistakes, not crimes. David made errors in documentation, but he never intended to hurt anyone." "But he did hurt people. Maria Gonzalez can't work anymore because of complications from a surgery your son performed incorrectly and then lied about. How is that a simple mistake?" Eleanor had no answer. The interview ended awkwardly, and her book tour was quietly canceled after that. I should have felt vindicated, but I just felt tired. 6 months after my book's release, David's trial began. I wasn't required to testify since the charges were related to insurance fraud and medical malpractice, not our divorce. But I attended the first day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, to see the man I'd been married to face justice. David looked terrible, thin, gray, defeated. He'd aged a decade in the years since I'd last seen him. When his attorney tried to argue that the falsifications were honest mistakes made under the pressure of a busy practice, the prosecutor destroyed him with testimony from hospital staff about David's cavalier attitude toward patient care and his anger when confronted about complications. Maria Gonzalez testified, describing her pain and David's dismissiveness. Jessica testified about the abortion and David's lies. One by one, the people David had hurt told their stories, and the jury's expressions grew grimmer with each testimony. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced David to 12 years in federal prison, to be followed by supervised release and permanent loss of his medical license. I watched David's face as the sentence was read. He didn't cry or protest. He just sat there blank and empty as everything he'd built collapsed around him. Eleanor sobbed in the gallery, but David didn't even look at her. As I left the courthouse, reporters swarmed me asking for comment. I gave them one sentence. "I hope the victims of David Morrison's crimes feel that justice was served today. That's all I have to say." That night, alone in my house with a glass of wine and the city lights visible through the windows, I tried to feel something about David's conviction. Satisfaction, vindication, even pity. But there was just numbness. Sarah called to check on me. "How are you feeling?" "I don't know. I thought this would bring closure, but it just feels like the end of a really long, really painful chapter that I can't get back." "You can't get the time back, but you can use what you learned. Catherine, you've helped thousands of people with your book. You've exposed a pattern of abuse that goes way beyond one bad marriage. That matters." She was right. The emails I received daily from readers told me that. Women leaving abusive relationships, men confronting their own toxic behavior, families having difficult conversations about narcissism and manipulation. My pain had become something useful, something healing. A month after David's conviction, I got a call from a foundation that worked with domestic violence survivors. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in joining their board and using my platform to advocate for policy changes. "We need voices like yours," the director said. "Educated, articulate women who can speak to the reality that abuse doesn't always look like what people expect. Your story shows that financial abuse and emotional manipulation are just as devastating as physical violence." I accepted finding purpose in work that felt meaningful. I started speaking at conferences, writing op-eds about domestic violence legislation, meeting with lawmakers about improving protections for abuse survivors. My life, which had felt so empty after the divorce, was filling with purpose I'd never imagined. 2 years after David abandoned me on that highway, I sold the house. It held too many ghosts, too many memories of the woman I'd been when I was trying to be what David needed. I bought a smaller place in the mountains, modern and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking pine forests. Eleanor never spoke to me again, which was fine. She moved to Florida to be near a cousin and continued posting on social media about David's innocence. Amanda and James stayed in touch, becoming genuine friends rather than just family by marriage. They visited my new place, and we talked about everything except David. I never remarried. The idea of trusting someone with that much power over my life again felt impossible. But I dated occasionally, learning to recognize red flags I'd missed with David. Control disguised as care, isolation disguised as intimacy, deception disguised as privacy. 3 years after the divorce, I was invited to give a TED Talk about financial abuse and independence. Standing on that red circle, looking out at thousands of faces in the audience and millions more watching online, I told my story one more time. My husband threw me out of a car on a dark highway and told me to do whatever I wanted. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was nothing without him. And you know what? I'd spent 23 years letting him think that, letting him believe his narrative about the provider husband and the dependent wife. But that night on that highway, I made a choice. I chose to stop pretending. I chose to take back my power. And I chose to show the world and him, and most importantly, myself, exactly what I was capable of. The audience stood and applauded, and I felt something shift inside me. The last piece of Catherine as David's victim fell away, and all that remained was Catherine. Just Catherine. Strong, independent, whole. 4 years after that night on Highway 72, I received a letter from David. The prison had screened it first, making sure it wasn't threatening, before forwarding it to my attorney, who forwarded it to me with a note saying I didn't have to read it if I didn't want to. I almost threw it away, unread. But curiosity, or maybe the need for final closure, made me open it. The letter was short, written in David's careful handwriting that I'd once found so attractive. Catherine, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I'm not writing to ask for anything or to make excuses. I'm writing because my therapist here says I need to take accountability without expecting forgiveness, and this is part of that process. I destroyed everything good in my life because I was selfish and arrogant and convinced I deserved more than I'd earned. I hurt you. I hurt my patients. I hurt everyone who trusted me. You were right about everything. I was living a lie, taking credit for your assets, your work, your strength. The man I pretended to be never existed. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. I don't expect you to forgive me or respond to this letter. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I did, and if I could undo any of it, I would. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. I hope you found it. I read the letter 3 times, looking for the manipulation, the hidden agenda, the ask beneath the apology. But it seemed genuine as much as anything from David could be genuine. I thought about responding, but ultimately decided against it. David's redemption arc, if he even had one, wasn't my responsibility. I'd spent too many years managing his emotions and his image. He could do his own work now. Instead, I folded the letter and put it in a box with the divorce papers, the settlement agreement, and the first draft of my book. Evidence of who I'd been and what I'd survived. Someday, maybe I'd look at it all and feel nothing but gratitude for the lessons. But for now, it was enough to be free. 5 years after David kicked me out of that car, I stood on the deck of my mountain house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah was inside making dinner, and we were expecting Amanda and her new girlfriend for the weekend. My second book about recovering from narcissistic abuse was being published next month, and I'd just accepted a position as executive director of the Domestic Violence Foundation I'd joined years earlier. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Morrison, this is Officer Sarah Chen from the California Highway Patrol. We found your information in our system from an incident report filed 5 years ago on Highway 72. I'm calling because we just arrested someone for abandoning his wife in almost the exact same location. Same exit ramp, same circumstances. The victim mentioned seeing a news story about your case, and that's why she called 911 immediately instead of trying to walk to safety. I wanted you to know that your story probably saved her life tonight. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling tears prick my eyes. Is she okay? She's shaken, but unharmed. We got there within 15 minutes of her call. Her husband is in custody. And ma'am, she asked if we could give you a message. She said to tell you that she's going to fight and she's going to win just like you did. Tell her I believe in her. Tell her she's stronger than she knows. After I hung up, I stood on that deck and finally let myself feel it. All of it. The pain of that night 5 years ago. The fear and anger and determination that had carried me through the divorce and the trials and the rebuilding, the pride in who I'd become, and the deep, profound satisfaction of knowing that my pain had meaning, that my story had helped someone else survive their own nightmare. David had tried to throw me away like garbage. He'd tried to leave me powerless and broken on that dark highway. But I'd taken that moment, that terrible moment, and transformed it into strength, into purpose, into a life that was entirely, completely, triumphantly mine. And standing there watching the sun set over the mountains 5 years free and finally at peace, I realized something important. The woman David had kicked out of that car really was powerless. But she didn't exist anymore. She'd been reborn on that highway, forged in fire and fury, and the woman who emerged was someone David never could have imagined, someone he never deserved. I smiled and walked inside to join my friends to the life I'd built from the ashes of the one David tried to burn down. And I didn't look back.